Call a special council meeting of September 27th to order. Just to let everybody know that the Reeve is feeling a little under the weather, so he's asked me, Deputy Reeve, to take over this meeting or chair this meeting, so I am more than happy to do that for Reeve. Confirmation of the agenda. Do I have a mover to the Council of the Township of North Huron accept the amended agenda for September 27th special council meeting to include the minutes of the Committee of Adjustment meeting held September 3rd and updated site plan control agreements? Paul moves. Kevin seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor? Carried. Is there any declaration of peculiar interest? None noted. So we have the minutes for the Committee of Adjustment meeting held September the 3rd. Do I have a motion for the Council of Township of North Huron hereby adopts the minutes of the Committee Adjustment meeting held September 3rd as presented? Councilor Heffer and Councilor Faulkner seconds. Is there any questions on those minutes? All those in favor? Carried. Okay, so we're going to move on to 5.1, which is the site plan for the property at Concession 10, Part Lot 1, 241, 247 King Street, and 240 to 246 Wellington Street, Blythe, Township of North Huron. I'll turn it over to Laura.
Good morning, Council. For your consideration today is the site plan and site plan agreement for two of the properties created by previous severances that were presented to Council back in June along King Street and Wellington Street in Blythe. So the proposal is 2 4-unit multiple attached dwellings, one on each lot. The zoning on the property is a result of a zoning amendment completed back in June 2019, which rezoned the properties to R2-20, a special medium residential zone, medium density residential zone, and this zone permits 4-unit multiple attached dwellings to a maximum of 4 units as proposed on the site plan. Each of these properties will have fronting and access onto their respective streets, King Street to the north and Wellington to the south. And as known, it's on the currently vacant former school location. So here's an aerial photo from 2015 of the subject property. And the items that were reviewed for the site plan review were the landscaping, building layout, the planting strip or fencing, grading and drainage, and the site servicing. So this shows the zoning as it is on the property today. The red there in the center are the two properties for consideration for site plan with that R2-20 zone. So to the east is the R1, and then the other medium density residential zone is to the west. So this light there, you can see the 4 units with their respective driveways coming in onto each of the streets, and a wooden fence being proposed to separate the property from those R1 low density properties to the east. A wooden fence 1.5 meters high, and that's in lieu of the planting strip to provide separation and privacy. All comments received from North Huron staff regarding lot grading, fire response, site water, and sanitary servicing were addressed through the revised site plans. And BM Ross and Associates reviewed the site plan as the township's engineer and offered comments regarding lot grading and drainage, which were then revised to meet their comments by the applicant. So here's some views from King Street of the property as it exists, and also their former school location. And again, they're standing, and that's more at the corner of Mill and King Street. So with no outstanding concerns for the proposed site plan and the site plan agreement in agreement between North Huron and the applicant to sign, and the securities in agreement as well, I'm recommending that this is approved and passed by law by the council.
Okay, is there any questions for Laura on her report? Okay, take that the Council of the Township of North Huron hereby receives the report of Laura Simpson, planner, regarding the proposed developments of J&S Elman Holdings Limited, Concession 10, part lot 1, 241 to 247 King Street, and 240 to 246 Wellington Street, Blythe Township of North Huron. And further, the council approves the proposed site plan agreements. And further, that council deems the adoption of bylaw 93, 2019, and bylaw 94, 2019 to be time sensitive, and approves an exception to the section 19.1 of the procedural bylaw to allow bylaw number 93, 2019, and bylaw 94, 2019 be passed at September 27 council meeting. Do I have a mover of that? Councillor McBurney, Councillor Van Henderson, seconds. I've asked, but I'll ask again, is there any questions in regards to the motion or the report? All those, oh, Chris, go ahead.
Just a complimentary one. It looks like a really good plan. I think it'd be a good one for Blythe and, good use of the property.
So motion on the floor. All those in favor? Carried. Okay, so we're gonna move on to those bylaws. So bylaw number 93, a bylaw to authorize a site plan control agreement between the corporation of the Township of North Huron and J&S Elman Holdings Limited for the King Street. Bylaw number 93, being a bylaw to authorize a site plan control agreement between the corporation of the Township of North Huron and J&S Elman Holdings Limited, concession 10, part lot 1, part lot 2, 241, 243, 245, and 247 King Street, be introduced, read first, second, and third, final time, signed by the Reeve clerk, and be engrossed in the bylaw. Do I have a mover of that? Councillor Palmer, second by Councillor Heffer. Any questions? All those in favor? Carried. Bylaw number 94, 2019. Bylaw number 94, 2019, being a bylaw to authorize a site plan control agreement between the corporation of the Township of North Huron and J&S Elman Holdings Limited, concession 10, part lot 1, part 5, 240, 242, 244, and 246 Wellington Street, be introduced, read a first, second, third, and final time, signed by the Reeve clerk, and engrossed in the bylaw book. Do I have a mover of that one? Councillor Van Henderson, Councillor Faulkner seconds. Any questions with regards to that motion or that bylaw? All those in favor? Carried. Okay, so we're gonna move on to Andrew Garland, BM Ross Associates, North Huron Water and Wastewater Master Plan. Donna?
Thank you. So good morning, council. So this morning we have with us from staff from BM Ross, and they're going to give us an update or present your first draft master plan. So back in 2017, the township was successful in receiving funding under the what we refer to as the CWWF fund, but that is a Clean Water and Wastewater Fund. So we received a grant, the total amount of the grant was $320,000, and we had to put in 75%, which was $80,000. So this has been a project that has been 2 years in the making, and it has to be fully completed by March the 31st of 2020. So I just wanted to say at the outset, we have a lot of information to cover here this morning. We will take a break, hopefully somewhere around 11. Andrew will sort of gauge where he's at in his slides at that time. But the one thing I wanted to stress is that we're not making any decisions here today. You're going to have a lot of information, and one of the biggest discussions that we're going to have in order to complete this process is about the rates. And so we will have a meeting, a follow-up meeting, just to discuss where most of the discussion will focus around the rates for the future. So just to give you also one more piece of information, so in the past, this would be our third 5-year rate study. So back in 2009 was our first crack at our rates, having a long-term plan. And so we had an update in 2009, and then we updated it again in 15. So As I said, 19 is the end of that 5-year study, and so what we're looking for is another 5-year plan to move forward with our rates. So again, it's some big decisions to be made, but we're not looking for those decisions today. We'll have ample time at a future meeting to discuss those. So with that, I am pleased to turn the meeting over to Andrew, and if you want to introduce yourself, Andrew, and your staff with you, then you can carry on.
My name is Andrew Garland with BMROS, and my colleague Ann Gibson is here. Come on up, Ann. No one's gonna bite you. So, council and staff, thanks for having us here today, and I think that's a perfect introduction, Donna. There is a lot of content here. So I'm gonna try to go somewhat quickly through some of the things that I was here to talk to you about in July. But of course, at any point in the morning, if you got questions about things, just interrupt me, and that's no problem at all. Okay. So just a quick agenda, and really this kind of lays out the method through which we do a lot of the analysis under this. This is a broad master plan, broader than we would maybe normally do because it does incorporate all of the financial aspects as well. But really in terms of setting the stage for looking at your water and wastewater infrastructure, we start with what we call the master plan. You'll hear the term capital plan too. Really that's establishing what kind of infrastructure needs you might have over the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years, and then beyond that as well. And really that's to help feed information on what kind of capital dollars you'll need to spend in the future. So from the capital plan or master plan, that really feeds the financial plan, which looks at your revenues existing and then what you might need in the future. And then from the financial plan, we look at, okay, is there a need to increase revenues? And then if there is a need, then that would be looking at the rates then. So that's kind of the order in which we look at things there. So in terms of slide content here, the majority of the slides will be covering the master plan, but I'm going to try to move through that a little bit more quickly. And at the end of the master plan content might be about the right time for a break anyways, before we get into the financial plan and rate study. In the master plan content, if you're looking really closely at some of the reserve information and some of the per capita flows and all that compared to when I was here in July, some of the numbers will have been tweaked a little bit just as we've kind of refined some of the analysis. In terms of kind of the broad conclusions and long-term planning, it doesn't have any impact to that. It's more of a, we want to get the records right because you're going to refer to this in the future when you're doing additional capacity assessments, a couple of years down the road. So it's more of a accuracy and documentation thing than it is going to change any of the conclusions from the past. So for the master plan, the capital plan, we start with looking at potential development and the rate that's been occurring at and project that to the future. We use that information to determine triggers for when you're going to need to expand major infrastructure. That would be like treatment and storage, then water distribution, wastewater collection, the water mains, the sewers, analyze those capacities as well to project needs in the future to service development lands. That's all kind of desktop paperwork stuff, typical of a master plan. With your master plan, I would say it goes a bit above and beyond the norm with some actual physical inspection of the sewers, reviewing the actual facilities as well to help give a better idea of existing conditions. And then through all of that, asset management planning is a buzzword that's been around for a few years and it's not going to go away. And really a big goal of all of this background information and the physical condition stuff is to help feed and improve your asset management plan moving forward. And I think you got someone coming in after I'm done today, so you got a long day ahead of you. Talk about that one. So just really quickly to illustrate, looking at some of the population stats, this chart from about the early 1980s to 2016, I think. Wingham population fairly steady over that time. If you look at the actual number of dwellings, there's been a slow but steady increase in the number of dwellings, and really the conclusion from that is that the unit population per household over time, which pretty well same everywhere else, the size of families are going down and the capita per household is decreasing. And a similar conclusion for Blythe, fairly steady population and a growth in dwellings. When we look at that, we want to contrast it to what kind of developments we have on the go, and this will look familiar from when I was here in July. And we're trying to plan for what your developments might or will require in terms of water and wastewater capacity. And so again, we've been doing reserve calculations on the basis of A2A lands and Hutton Heights in Wingham being fully developed, the Rutledge subdivision in Blythe being fully developed, and then a nominal infill allowance in each community, along with the full amount of the cross-border servicing agreement with Morris Turnberry being fully utilized. And in our opinion, that's a very quite conservative way of looking at this in terms of probably overestimating for some time what your actual demands might be. And one way to illustrate that would be this chart. The green line at the top would show you number of households in Wingham if all of those, what we've been considering development commitments, were fully used. And if you compare that with where you are just before 2020 in terms of number of households, that's a huge increase of close to 600 units. And those three, the red, the blue, the purple line, showing kind of what we've established as sort of low, medium, and high growth forecasts for a 50-year period. This would show you that even at the higher growth forecast, you're not likely to need to utilize the full reserve capacity for what we're considering commitments right now. So this is again just a way to illustrate that I think you're quite conservative in considering those development commitments. In Blythe, the impact of considering that development as commitments is not quite as extreme. You can see by the end of the 50-year period, the high growth forecast is getting a little bit closer to reaching the full utilization of those commitments. But in looking at all of this, the thing to consider, I think, is what really establishes a potential development as a commitment. And the reason I bring that up is, from our perspective, you don't want to over-commit yourselves, and what I mean by that, your goal would always be to have some kind of reserve capacity, because if the next developer comes along and says, I want to do, A, B, or C, do you have enough capacity for me? You want to be able to say yes. And if you've considered too much potential development that may or may not happen as commitments and lock yourselves into having to surface those in the future, then you might be kind of artificially creating a situation that's worse than it actually is. And so conventional practice would be to really consider a development and commitment once kind of the site plan approval's been issued and everything's finalized. And so it's just, I guess, something to keep in the back of your mind and think about when you're doing these reserve capacities is what do you really want to consider yourselves of having committed. We use those projections and those development commitments to analyze what kind of capacities your treatment facilities, water treatment, wastewater treatment, and water storage has, and that applies to both Wingham and Blythe. Sewage pumping stations, that would also consider to be a significant type of infrastructure, but really we consider that under the umbrella of the wastewater collection system. And so both of these, all categories would apply to both communities. Just talking a bit about water treatment, and I think we talked about this in July, that without adequate storage, storage provides a couple of purposes. One would be to help with fire flows, which is a relatively big demand over a short term. And then another is to attenuate peak flows, and what I mean by that is over the course of a day, like midnight, you can appreciate there's not a lot of demand in the community, but then in the morning when everyone's showering and making breakfast and same at night, that flow is gonna go up. So if you look at it over a 24-hour period, your flow is gonna go up and then down a bit and then up again and then down, kind of like that. So when you have a good amount of storage to help offset those peaks, that helps attenuate that. And then really your treatment, your water supply and your treatment equipment really only has to provide sufficient capacity for the 24-hour kind of maximum demand. When you don't have adequate storage, your supply, your treatment equipment needs to be able to provide that peak flow more or less instantaneously. And so all that's kind of a long way of saying that storage really affects how you look at what you need for supply and treatment ability. And then in terms of how we calculate peaks, when the real data isn't there, it's typically in the order of about 3 times the average flow for a community the size of Wingham, and closer to 4 times the average flow for a community the size of Blythe. For wastewater treatment, typically you're evaluating capacity on an annual average basis. Peaks aren't quite as important in terms of compliance with ministry requirements. Where peaks are important, and they're becoming more and more important, would be looking at peak wastewater flows during storm events and things like that, as your plant having to bypass. And so the average condition is really a compliance issue, and the peak flow, there's a compliance element to it, but it's largely about the physical ability of your system to handle what's going on. So for Wingham, and again, this will look familiar from last time, you got 2 wells, each with capacity that would be well above what your current maximum demand is. Firm capacity, again, just as a safety measure, we're looking at what's the capacity of your system, assuming the largest well is out of service for some reason. So for even your firm capacity now well above current maximum demand. When you look at your commitments, and again, this includes the cross-border servicing, you see that the projected requirements for that are pretty close to double what your existing usage is. So that gives you a hint too that the commitments we're looking at is fairly conservative. One thing I'd flag is a potential issue, and I understand that there's been discussion looking at that cross-border servicing agreement. The way the agreement is worded right now, the current allocations are in terms of cubic meters per day, but there's no real definition for, is that an average day over the course of a month or a year, or is that a single 24-hour period? And I think the way the billing is described in there, it sort of implies that it's more of an average period. And the reason I flag this is that it's a pretty significant volume of water in that agreement. And if that number really is an average, the implication is that in the short term, you might have to supply at higher rates, and that becomes significant in looking at the reserves. So if that agreement's going to be amended at some point in time, I just suggest a little bit of attention be paid to clarifying and spelling that out a little more clearly in there how that's defined. When you boil it all down and look at what you're using now and what the commitments are, this table kind of summarizes in terms of total capacity, so that with all of your supply online, a lot of reserve there, either for the maximum day or the peak flow consideration. And for firm capacity, assuming that larger well is out of service, again, under maximum day conditions, you've got plenty of reserve there. Under the peak flow, it shows up as a negative there, but I think that's in reality a little bit more negative than your actual situation, because we've been talking about the fact that storage can help attenuate the peak. So really this slide would be on the basis of no storage at all. You do have storage right now with the standpipe, even though not all of it is usable. The amount you do have does help, and we know that you're already planning for replacement of that, so really that would make the whole peak flow consideration, in my mind, kind of disappear from this analysis once that standpipe is replaced and the full volume is able to be utilized from that. In the absence of adequate storage, a solution would be to have additional standby well pumping capability and additional treatment, but I don't think that would be the way to go here. So for the storage facility in Wingham, your existing standpipes, close to 1,700 cubic meters, only about 230 is usable by gravity. Your future projected need, again, depending on how the commitments are viewed and how the cross-border servicing agreement is viewed, would be in the 2,700 to 3,500 cubic meter range. Probably ultimately, you're gonna replace at the same site, you're gonna wanna come close to maximizing kind of what you can fit there, because to add a couple of hundred cubic meters doesn't really fundamentally impact the overall capital cost all that much. So this is, the storage thing is really how we got started in this project before it evolved. And so we know it's a significant component of what we've got going on here. And just to kind of walk through the process to have a new storage facility implemented. Really it started as a Schedule B class environmental assessment, which would be looking at different potential sites, different potential storage styles. Throughout all that, there is agency consultation involved. As you develop those alternative solutions, you're looking at potential costs for the different styles and sites. Potentially, depending on the site, you get into archaeology and environmental screening, and there's a public consultation element involved with the agency consultation as well. Through all of that process, you end up selecting a preferred alternative, and then really go to design and ministry approval, and then get the thing built. So this project kind of started this way, but fairly early on, looking at what potential sites would be there, or maybe better put, the lack of potential sites to put new storage here, and working with town staff and operations staff. Really earlier on, it was identified that it would be more economic and it would be feasible to just replace standpipe at the existing site with a larger and a bit taller of a facility. But really that eliminates the need for the Schedule class, or Schedule B Class EA, reduces it to a Schedule A, which is essentially just a green light to go ahead with it. Eliminates most of the consultation and the site screening work, but the technical analysis remains largely the same. And through the master plan work that we've been doing, really your sizing, your operational criteria, all that's going to be established. We're recommending you're going to want a booster pumping station there to be able to fully utilize the volume of the standpipe. And also through this, we're getting a preliminary site plan and some drawings from a potential standpipe fabricator all put together under this umbrella. So all that is to help put you in a position to apply for ministry approval. Remaining steps for when you want to move forward to that would just be to kind of finalize the preliminary design, at least to a point that it would be good enough for ministry approval. They don't require that all of your structural and electrical design is done. You submit that application, ministry gets your approval, and then you finalize the tender package and put it out to get it built. Again, we've been working pretty closely with sort of one of the leading suppliers of this type of building in the province, and through working with them in some recent tender experience for similar jobs, looking to do the standpipe and the booster pumping station, you're probably in the order of 3.4 million plus HST, but that would include all of the engineering and approval costs along the way with that.
Andrew, I just have a question about, so I go back to the discussion about we have 1,680 cubic meters in the standpipe, but we can only use 232 of it. With new technology and this booster pumping that you're talking about, would that allow us to to be able to use more of the water that's in the standpipe? Is it the reason why this is the way it is because of the how old that standpipe is? Is that again the way it's gravity fed?
Good question. If there were no structural concerns with your existing standpipe at all, we would just be recommending to add a booster pumping station at that site without replacing the facility, and that would then allow you to fully utilize that 1700 or 1680. It's a joint consideration now. We know that there's some concern with the structural condition there, and so if you gotta replace it anyways, and it's gonna be a similar technology, then you're gonna wanna have the booster compensation added. You would not necessarily need to do them at the same time, and within our office, and I haven't talked to you folks about it yet, so I don't mean to catch you off guard this morning, but you might even tender them as different contracts. The person that builds the standpipe is kind of one type of contractor, and the person that builds the booster pump station is another one. So you could have some opportunity to divide it up that way, but that's probably a discussion for another day.
Yeah, and the follow-up question to that is, so in replacing an existing standpipe at its current location, what does the system have to do? So for example, if you're replacing it, obviously you gotta just take it down first.
Yep.
At the same site. So when you take it down, you're going to not have that availability. So what is the system, what do we gotta do to the system today to ensure that when and if this happens, that the system is adequate for fire, for peak, for all that kind of stuff? What is it that we have to do or to ensure that we have to do?
Yeah, also a great question. Historically, from where your well supplies are, those pumps would just turn on and off depending on the water level in that standpipe. The standpipe is telling it, I'm full, stop supplying, or I'm starting to empty, fill me back up. You take that away, your pumps can no longer be quite so simple in terms of an on and off, always discharging at the same rate. So, and I think this has already been done, or it's underway, the motor starters, the drives that operate those pumps, you have the opportunity to vary the speed. That really ramps the pump up or down more in response to demand in the system.
Okay.
And it does mean that you always have to have at least a small pump or a small amount of water pumping to keep your system charged and pressurized. So it is something that has to be factored in and considered, and we've had some discussions, and staff have helped have discussions with, say, the fire chief here, just talking about, okay, for the period this thing is offline, what would be some contingencies in place to help make sure things aren't unacceptably compromised. You do have to live with a little bit of headache there for that time, but one of the advantages for replacing what's there with a similar technology is that they're a relatively quick build compared to certain other styles of storage. So I think they'll have that down, and then a new thing could be constructed within a couple of 3 or 4 months, something like that.
Chris, yes?
Through you, Deputy Reeve. Andrew, is it possible to perhaps rent a portable tank that would allow a little bit of buffer?
Yep, you can, there's different things you can do. You can have people on standby. You could have a tank rented that I'd suggest probably would be for something like a fire condition if you needed that big volume. The only problem is to get a significant volume for something like a fire, you'd have a couple of tanks then, and you might be paying a lot for that. So whether it's better just to have a company that does that kind of thing sort of on speed dial, all if you needed it, or to actually have something parked in your community, I'm not sure what the best solution there would be, but it might be something to kind of further discussion with the fire chief on that. And part of it too, in talking to your operations staff, we set up the contract in a way that really is planning for the construction to occur at your historically lower demand times to the extent possible. I mean, it is work you don't wanna do in winter time, but the goal would be to avoid sort of peak water demand season while you're doing it.
Sorry, Sean would like to add something?
Yes, if I may,
Yep.
Deputy, just to build on what Andrew's already.
Okay. Let's reconvene. Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, so into the financial stuff. With your financial plan, just highlighted some key considerations. There are separate plans for water and wastewater. The water financial plan really is a legislative requirement under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and that shows up in your drinking water license. Those things are renewed on a regular basis, and your next renewal application for your license is due December 24th, 2019. We'd like to help get it out before Christmas Eve, because nobody wants to be doing that on Christmas Eve. The wastewater financial plan, it's not a legislative requirement the same way water is, but I would say our experience is most municipalities, townships, like you would do it in conjunction with water. And it's really a preliminary budget for at least a 6-year period, that's the requirement. In this case, and in most cases we work with, we're using a 10-year period. So to put it together, really you're forecasting operating expenditures for a 10-year period. Then we're incorporating planned capital work as well. You can incorporate revenue expectations from grants, borrowing, using current interest rates, all of that. It incorporates the amortization of the physical assets you have right now, and then identifies the financial position or the net worth of the system. Our findings for water, based on the 2019 budget, revenue about 1.1 million, and then that's broken down into what's from rates, what's from the capital contribution, miscellaneous, and then compared to expenses, which would include any capital work, exclude any capital works, is a little under 900,000. So the good thing is that your revenues are exceeding your operating expenses. You are putting money towards reserves. So then the reserves currently about 2.4 million. In your financial position, which we could define as your reserves plus the book value of your assets minus any debt, which would be zero for you right now. Your financial position 14 million. Said it's good news that your revenue exceeds the expenses. The only real problematic things, strictly speaking, the operating revenue from rates is less than what the operating expense is, and so I would say that's not entirely surprising to us. We've seen lots of cases where operating expense would increase at a rate greater than inflation, and what a lot of municipalities have put in place for rate increases each year.
Sorry, Andrew.
Yeah.
Reed Bailey?
Just a few questions. Miscellaneous, what would fall under miscellaneous for $30,000?
Give an answer to that one.
Or I can.
Sure, okay.
Yeah. So, as part of the waterworks budget, then we have like your late payment revenue, and we bill back and forth between water and sewer. And that must also include the interest income and things like that. So it's a whole bunch of things. It's not just something we don't know. It's in the budget, you'll see there's, as I said, interest revenue, late payment revenue, and billing revenue makes all that up. Yeah.
So the other part was the cash reserves, so that's $240,000. That means all we have is 240, was that
2.4 million.
million, okay?
Yeah.
And then the financial position is, you're saying that our water systems are worth $14 million.
It'd be the book value of the assets, which is incorporated all the depreciation of the years, plus the reserves minus any debts, which is zero for you, so.
Not to be confused, sorry, with replacement costs or
That's right.
anything like that.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that in a minute. sorry.
Okay, because my next question
Yeah.
was how would you replace, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So just to carry on with our findings, the actual asset replacement cost, closer to 40 million. versus the net book value of 11.4. The average remaining life expectancy of the water assets, so that'd be the treatment and storage and the distribution system, the average, about 43 years. And the current rate of replacement, which is just a calculation that we do, and really you take the replacement cost and divide it by the 3-year average of what you're spending on capital plus what you're putting into reserves. And so the current rate of replacement can come out about 62 years. So compared to some municipalities working, that's not actually that bad. The flag would just be that right now your remaining asset life would theoretically be less than what your current rate of replacement is.
Yep, you got it?
So again, just to put this in layman's terms, what you're telling me is that every year to replace equipment that's failing, over your 62 years, we need to come up with $729,000. Do I read that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so right now we need $729,000 every year put away just for replacement, not for fixing it on a daily basis. How much are we putting away now, Don?
We collect about 300,000.
Half of it.
So we're only collecting half. And that's all collected through
That's
$20?
the $15 a month.
Okay. Okay,
See, it just doesn't work.
I know that, do
can't.
we have a discussion or not? Or is this not the time?
I would say it wouldn't be really the time today.
Okay.
We can definitely, when it comes to calculating the rates, absolutely. And determining whether those are the rates we wanna use, that would be the time when we talk about whether it's, whether we can do that.
There's a little bit more on the rate
There
study
is.
coming up,
Yep.
so
Okay.
we'll have some chance.
Some key assumptions that I don't wanna get too bogged down in, but just to flag, things like electricity costs, experience has been that that's outpacing inflation, so we try to factor that in. And then look at, other expenses, being more in line with inflation. Some assumptions based on current interest rates, and then for capital, on the water side of things, we've incorporated, replacement of that, standpipe, we say in 2020, that's just for the use of the financial calculations regardless of what, you can decide what year that's gonna happen in. And then we made an assumption on, based on, if you go back to that whole projected street reconstruction schedule, just an allowance for the water main portion of that, to be included on an annual basis in here. And then made an assumption as well about, in terms of paying for the storage, what would be, from reserves and what would be, borrowed. A couple things that could be included for this thing when it's finalized would be any of the electrical or mechanical deficiencies. In the grand scheme of things, it's not going to make a big difference in terms of the rate percentage increase suggested. And then I just flagged you, like, there's no allowance in here for servicing of Hutton Heights or anything with the Blythe water storage facilities.
Reed Bailey, you had a question?
Just a quick one again, and probably the last slide you talked about this, if we're going, it says new storage paid from reserves and 2.6. Do we drain all our reserves to come up with a 2.6 or just some of the reserves?
Just some of it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the route.
Do you have any idea, 50% or what?
We
Well-
maintain 1 million in reserves.
Okay, okay, thank you.
So in terms of looking at a cost recovery model in your financial plan, preliminary goals identified, we suggest you want to have operating revenue equal to your operating expenses. Need to finance the forthcoming water storage project. Need to maintain the rate of replacement at 62 years or less. That's the current number, but again, it's not ideal because it's a little bit higher than the remaining life. But we think a reasonable goal for now would be to just not allow that 62 year to increase from what it is. And then to maintain your or increase the financial position. And bullets 3 and 4 here are really about sustainability on an ongoing basis. So in looking at the projected mean and comparing it to what revenues currently are. It suggests a revenue increase is required, and just, there's a number of scenarios we looked at, and when we finalize the financial plan report, we'll put them all in there, but don't want to burden you with too many scenarios today, but just to look at two ones that we wanted to flag. We're gonna suggest the minimum annual increase would be for that matching the current labor replacement, and that'd be 7.2% over a 10-year period. And then your ideal annual increase, which would in order to match your current remaining life, match your labor replacement to your current remaining life, would be about a 9% over a 10-year period. And what we're seeing from that is that the existing 3.5% isn't sustainable. So when I say over a 10-year period, the goal would be that 7.2, that 9% would occur every year for 10 years, but that at the end of 10 years, really you're caught up, and that it's not forever and ever that this is going to be, that in the future, you would have to still have increases, but they'd be linked to what your inflation you're seeing is, rather than trying to catch up. So when we just look at a typical hypothetical customer based on what we're seeing for usage, and this is based on a review of your customer billings for the last couple of years. That 7.2% annual increase for your typical Winland customer on water would be about $25 a year, or $2.08 a month. And then for a Blythe unmetered residential customer, $38 a year, or $3.17 a month. And then for a typical Blythe ICI customer, close to double that, I guess, at $70 per year. And then the 9% ranges $35 to $50 a year, or a little under $3 to a little over $4 per month. And so again, that would be, this is the magnitude of increase that we would suggest every year for 10 years, and then after that to really go down to what inflation would be. So I guess I'll park it there and talk about funds for wastewater next, but were there any other questions specific to water?
So when you're talking about the $25 a year or the 38, are you talking about the reserve component of the bill, or are you talking about the actual per cubic meter rate?
Good question. We're talking about total revenue, however it comes. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but you could increase that flat rate capital reserve, you could put it all in the rates, you could do a combination of both.
The way we looked at it for this was adding that 7.2 annual increase just to the rates, not changing that $15 charge. But you could split it up and make it look different if you wanted to look at it that way. Just for this initial start, we just left the 15 alone.
And the only reason I'm asking that is because, for transparency purposes on the bill, generally people would indicate they know what the reserve line on their bill is for today. They know that's to go to capital replacement. If we start mingling capital replacement within the rate of the cubic meter, then the argument is, am I losing is the ratepayer losing visibility about what they're physically paying for capital replacement versus general operating? And again, I don't know how practically we would do this, where you would take the operating, like if that rate was that technically operationally, you would have a bill. How would you know to move some of that money to reserve? I guess is my question practically. Dawn, I'm looking at you practically because I see this being commingled somehow and something getting lost in the translation between billing and the ratepayer knowing how much they're putting away for capital replacement.
Yeah, so what you'd have to do, and as Ann said, in this scenario, then it was all towards operating, but really I would think that the combination of the two seems more along the line of what we've been doing in the past, so that the capital amount that we're generating, that $15 pot, keeps accumulating, and it's set aside and it's easy to identify. So I would think probably one of the scenarios that we would lean towards would be not to have
have it all in operating, just for that reason, that we would determine what's the proper split between operating and capital and move forward like we always have, so.
Well, but what I'm confused about is the 7.2, everything about this increase is talking about increase in order to match a replacement. It's not talking about operations at all. It's talking about matching the replacement of the systems we have today. So to say that we're putting it in the rates doesn't make any sense to me, because it has nothing to do with the operation of the actual the system at all. It's everything to do with replacement. So to put it in the rates, in my mind, you're being less transparent, and that's not what my hope is to say, yeah, it's $25 extra, but now in 50 years, your kids or my kids aren't gonna have to worry about increase in rates that are gonna be astronomical in order to pay for what we have today.
We held a benefit show.
Councillor Fodder?
Through you, Andrew. The water rate increase you're talking about, the replacement, is that including the sewage rates, or is it, this is just strictly the water?
Just water.
Just water.
Oh.
We'll come to sewer in a minute.
Just to maybe go back a couple slides just to clarify, and again, point out that probably needs to be both. So on here, we're showing from last year, your operating revenue just from rates at 780,000, and your operating expense at 880 would suggest that needs to go up as well. So it probably is, in the end of the day, realistic to think of an increase of both.
Councillor Paulman?
Chairman, what you were talking about, it'd be best to be transparent, would have an extra line item stating that it is for reserves, for future.
Well, currently we already have that.
It's
So currently on the water bill.
Oh, I've never seen
Yeah,
one yet.
so
Okay.
as on a water bill for current urban people, urban taxpayers, there's a rate, there's also the rate for the usage per, you have a base, even if you didn't turn on any water, there's a base water
Okay.
number, and then there's a usage per cubic meter and a rate. That's part of this rate. And then there's separate lines that are called sewer reserve and water reserve.
I see that. Yeah.
So those are the transparent discussion about replacement, because when those came on the bill, about 10, 15 years ago, because when I first moved to North Huron, they weren't on the bill. And they were put on the bill just after, a year after I came into North Huron. So that, when they were put on there, that was specific to the ratepayer that says, you're putting this away so that when we need to replace the road work or the water lines and stuff underneath, then we're not asking you for any more money. And because the water and wastewater system needs to be user pay. That's it's not supposed to be general taxation that uses that. So for people like yourself and Anita who have never seen a water bill because you just have water on your own, that's what we're talking about when it talks about water rates. Reed Bailey?
So can I just touch on the fact that we have we're doing the reserves, and putting away, we're talking about 10 years down the road, we'll be able to say we've got enough to replace everything. Aren't we using the reserves now to put the new water tank up? Are we eating into them now?
Well, for this analysis, we've assumed that you're gonna use a portion of it, but then borrow the balance. But the rates that we've come up with there factor all of that in,
Yeah.
that you're looking to do that.
So there's not actually gonna be $33 million in there in 10 years, because we know as we go along, we're using this every day.
Absolutely.
Okay, so just everybody understands that. When you say 10 years from now, you're gonna have a gazillion, you're not, because we're using that money to build the water tank, to fix the infrastructure under the streets. It's being used wisely, don't get me wrong, but it really is part of operation.
Yeah, Sean's gonna use it every year when he digs up a road.
Yeah.
Any other water questions before we go to wastewater?
That'd be nice.
So it probably looks a little bit uglier than the water side of things. And I wouldn't say we're as advanced in terms of putting together the memo and report for it, but part of the reason for that is that we don't want to reinvent the wheel time and time again. It'll be good to get some decisions on rates before trying to finalize things. But just the findings to date, your asset replacement costs, wastewater infrastructure just by its nature is more costly than water in most places. So your asset replacement costs close to 63 million. Net book value after factoring in depreciation close to 9 million. Remaining average life, got 28 years shown there, but we're in a bit of discussion right now, trying to really confirm if that's the right number. Pardon me, or if it should be something closer to 40, but that's the range that we're talking about, say 30 to 40 years. Pardon me. And then the current rate of replacement, again, calculated the same way as the water rate, would be more like 165 years. And then the annual revenue requirement, just for capital, we're seeing about double of the water. So again, trying to look at revenues versus expenses. Your operating cost of 612, or sorry, your operating revenues 612, it's less than your operating expense by a little bit, but it's pretty close. And then the same reserve number shows up here. I should have clarified that before, that it wasn't a separate water and wastewater reserve shown. And then your financial position overall of 11.4. So goals for wastewater and similar to water, wanting to have revenues equal to expenses. Bullet 2, a need to manage the replacement and build reserves to improve the rate of replacement. And what I mean by this is, like whereas for water, maybe it is realistic to catch up in 10 years or a little more than 10 years. For wastewater, we don't think that is as realistic. So maybe the starting point, you want to just look at sort of a parallel increase, whatever you're going to increase for water, the same for wastewater. And over time, that will improve your rate of replacement, even if it doesn't bring it down in a 10-year period. So on the assumption that you were to parallel the rate increase to the water, again, the 7.2 annual increase for your typical residential customer, that's $25 a year, a little over $2 a month increase. Blind ICI user, more like $70 a year. And at the 9% increase, that jumps up 2.67, 2.92 for residential customers. So again, that's for a 10-year period per year we'd be suggesting, and then whereas with water we're saying you catch up after 10 years at this rate, there'd still be some catching up to do on the wastewater side after the 10-year period.
Councillor Faulkner?
The two slides back, and putting the revenue, operating, capital, and all that together, that's both systems, William and Black?
That's right. Yep.
So is, I guess what I'm getting at is the revenue, how's that revenue split between the two? Like if one didn't need water upgrading at this time, but how do you, if they're all paying the same percentage, but you don't need the upgrade, the other, how is that split in here when you're paying for your water? Is one paying for the other and the other paying? Does it ever come down to a 50-50 split in revenue, or if you're paying the same, on capital, but not 50-50?
In a couple of slides, I'll talk about what we've seen for your rates versus expenses for each system, and what I'll end up telling you is that it's looked pretty good in terms of proportioning, like usage versus rate. And then in terms of, which community needs a capital project this year versus which needs one next year, that's maybe as much of a philosophical question as it is an engineering one. But I think, going back to the days of amalgamation, the spirit of it would have been that, everyone kind of pays the same and then shares that moving forward. And not every municipality does. I can tell you, we work in a couple of places where it gets kind of messy because they fight over, we paid for this 10 years ago and now we don't wanna pay for that this year and all that. But I guess,
Works if the water line goes all the way down to the end.
yeah, that's
We're
right.
headed that way.
Intuitively, one way to rationalize it might be, you know, Wingham's got a bigger system, but also a bigger customer base, so even though there's more infrastructure to maintain here, and that's in the long run gonna cost you more, you're also getting more reserves from a higher number of customers here. Does it balance perfectly in the end of the day? Probably not perfectly, but it might be pretty close.
Reed Bailey?
So at the end of the day, we've got $1 billion worth of infrastructure, if I read that right, that we're trying to put reserves away for to replace and use it at the same time between the water and the sewer.
Or 100 million?
100 million.
Oh, 100 million? I feel better. So,
Glad you do.
I keep losing a zero or adding one on there, don't I? But, so then, obviously over 10 years, that's an impossibility to try to keep it up and that. But it's interesting that, yeah, we have $100 million worth of infrastructure that we have paid for and continue to pay for. And you know, I'm always gonna point this out to get it to the edge of town. And I'll stop right there.
I think what's interesting about this, from my perspective, is that, and really when it comes to this rate study, is going to be the discussion about what it's gonna cost the typical resident when they see it. Like, you know, and that's, and when we say at $2 or $3 a month, that's an average, because it's all gonna be based on your usage.
That's using the median user.
Yeah,
the
so,
midpoint.
from an individual, when you change, like when you say a 7 or 9% increase in water rates, or the panic's gonna be, what the hell he's doing? Like, you're killing me here. But in all honesty, a lot of the background that's been presented here today is exactly the background that needs to be presented to the common ratepayer. It says, here's where we are, here's where we need to get. And I know it's gonna feel like we're backing you, but we're also, this is why we're trying to develop the lands behind Grandview and the Hutton Heights. These are all things that we're trying to do to alleviate some of the pressure on the existing ratepayer. But I'm sorry, you're still gonna have to pay for what we've had. And all honestly and argumentatively, for 100 years, this is not just this council's problem. This has been a problem for every council for the past 50 years that they've never been able to solve, and don't expect us to solve it today. We're trying to do our part to make sure that you know, and if for $25 a year, I've spent worse. Personally. Councillor Hubbard.
To your site, we're getting our water at a heck of a good rate here. To my way of thinking, for all we're paying out, it's for what, a family of 4, about 10 cents a day going into the thing, like, I don't see anything else in town that they're getting that cheap, so our rates have to go up, there's no getting around it. We just have to pass it, that they're getting a good deal, and it doesn't come free, in my opinion.
I'm just gonna follow that up with, I'm not sure about what we're gonna go with the rates, but I'm gonna follow up with something else. So I'm asking everybody in Wayne and Blythe to pay $25, $30 a month, right? For endless water, you have your showers, your bath, you do your lawn, you do everything. And you complain that you'll pay $1 for this at the grocery store.
That's why he's coming.
Just throwing that out there.
Exactly.
And say nothing, and say nothing.
Oh, I think they say something. They don't like paying for it either. So, go ahead, Andrew.
We're not allowed to bring bottled water into the office, because it looks a very... So yeah, with the rate study, again, going back to the start of today in the introduction, really it follows you. In the financial plan, you figured out what revenues need to increase by, the rate study's looking at how you're gonna get there. The rate structure that you have currently is different charges for each system. Part of that's affected by the fact that you got some meters and some without water meters. You got residential and some ICI charges. volumetric rate and a fixed fee for capital that we talked about. At this point in time, the findings for water rates, and the first two bullets here, talk about separately, and they relate to the conversation a couple of minutes ago. The revenue for Wingham and Blythe is pretty consistent with water usage. We see that Wingham uses about 72% of the overall water if you combine both systems, and provide about 73.4% of revenue. In our opinion, that's a pretty good match, and I think most systems would be happy if you had that. And then revenue for each community matches expenses as well. And you can provide as the example, they provide about 29% of the revenue and incur about 28% of the expense. So again, I think that's pretty good. Bullets 3 and 4 are just focusing on Wingham to give you a snapshot of the impact of the residential versus ICI rates. So right now you have a declining rate structure for some of the bigger water users. So in Wingham, your residential customers use a little over half of the water, but contribute close to 80% of the revenue, whereas your larger ICI users use about 37% of the water, but contribute 16% of revenue. Now, we wouldn't suggest, based on experience in most communities, that the percentage of water used has to match perfectly with the revenue contributions, and in fact, just because of the nature of bigger water users and kind of the economy of scale there, in most places it wouldn't match perfectly. But we think it's a little bit out of whack here compared to what the norm might be. And I think that's going to be a point of discussion. I don't know if it's for today or another day, but.
We'll probably have time to talk about it at some point, so yeah.
Okay. But really just pointing that out, that the larger ICI users do have this declining rate structure, and we've seen that other places, but in modern day agreements or things like that, it wouldn't be the norm to give that kind of break. And then looking at Belgrade customers pay about 60% of the expense incurred from purchasing that water from your neighbor there. Going forward, rates are going to be really linked to the financial plan. Go ahead.
Sorry, you got
Through you, Chair. Okay, number 5, could you explain that? Belgrade pays 60% of the system expense?
I can explain.
Sure.
I
Or
can explain
is that
part.
coming later?
No, we might as well discuss it right now, so it's food for thought. So, as Trevor said, in 2009, we aggressively started planning for the future with we undertook this huge rate increase or rate study, and we looked at all sorts of philosophies. So at that time, that's where we came up with the $15 or it was $10 back then for the capital. But at that time, we did that based on a building rather than per unit. So I'm digressing a bit, but I just wanted to give you a bit of a history here. So say, for example, the apartments over here, when there's 34 units in that apartment, on everything else that we bill out, we would bill them 34 times the rates, right? So we would recoup the rates based on a unit being a household. But for the $15 or $10 a month, we didn't do that. So that was one philosophy. The other philosophy that we changed at that time was that we quit billing tenants. And so we made all the owners of the properties responsible for their whole bill, whether for the tenant's bill, and so it gets put on their taxes if their tenants don't pay. And the third part of all that was North Huron treating all their customers the same. So typically for these small small water systems, when you only have a few people to recover the costs from, the rates are much higher. And so at that time, even though we knew in 2009 that what we did is we were taking all the costs to run all 3 water systems, and then although Wingham is metered, we set rates that Blythe and Belgrade were the same flat rate to treat them all the same. But that meant that Wingham and Blythe were subsidizing the Belgrade customers. And back then, it was about $4,000 a year. So as you know, we have increased our rates each year, but as Andrew just pointed out earlier, discussions, the revenue recovered from rate increases has not matched how quickly the operating expenses go up. So for Belgrade, what happens now is we pay our bill to Morris Turnberry, and they charge $1,055.64 per year per customer. And if you're on the Morris Turnberry side, that's what you pay. But our philosophy had been to treat Belgrade and Blythe the same. So we are paying Morris Turnberry, but we are only billing our customers $616. So there is quite a shortfall there. And as I said, when we started this in 2009, it wasn't that big of a difference, and so it was quite a palatable exchange, if you will. But as Andrew pointed out, the operating expenses has steadily increased for that system, and so there's quite a big discrepancy now. So that's what we're asking you to consider, not today, but it is definitely part of one of the pieces of the pie that we have to discuss in the rate options, whether or not we're going to continue with that philosophy, or whether we're going to take some sort of a phased approach to it, or whether we're going to move to the full amount that the Morris Turnberry, the people on the Morris Turnberry side of Belgrave pay. So that's a bit of the history behind how that all came to be. It was all part of that big initial aggressive approach to long-term planning, and it was a decision made back in 2009.
Billy?
So the Belgrade customers pay 60% of the local system. Do they use 60% of it? Like, how is that figured? Like, I'm gonna think when I see something like that, I'm thinking 60% of the people using the Belgrade water would be in the North Huron side then? Or is it just?
No, it's based on, so Morris Turnberry owns and operates the system, and they've determined that the total operating cost divided by the total number of users, whether they're on the Morris Turnberry side or on the North Huron side, that they should pay $1,055 a year. But we chose not to, we pay that to Morris Turnberry, but we have chosen through this philosophy not to recover that from the Belgrade people. But whether they use 60%, the 60% has nothing to do with the usage, it was to do with keeping the rate the same as Blythe.
So they're not metered.
No, they're not metered.
They're not metered in Belgrade.
So when you say 60%, then the town of North Huron is paying the other 40%?
The other water users, yes.
Yeah.
$438 per house.
Yeah.
How many houses? 20?
It works out to about 14, yeah, I think it's up to 30, 31, 32 now. So it works out to about $14,894 a year in the shortfall of what we're collecting. That the other two systems would be paying that $14,000.
I'm not sure, but $14,000, I don't get subsidized in Wingham, and he doesn't get subsidized in Blythe. We did not set the rates. We
Morris
agreed to
Turnberry
the,
did.
what's that?
Morris Turnberry set the rate.
Yeah, so I think not today, but moving forward, we're gonna have to have a hard look at that one, because here we go again, we're subsidizing outside of our jurisdiction.
Well,
Actually,
no, we're subsidizing in our
Inside.
jurisdiction.
Yeah, sorry, two people outside our jurisdiction.
No,
No.
no,
No.
no. The ratepayers in Blythe, the ratepayers in Belgrade that are connected to the Morris Turnberry system are paying what we determine is the rate that we're willing to charge them,
Okay.
which is $400 less than we should be charging. We've chosen that.
Okay,
Not Morris Turnberry, we've chosen that.
so we are going to have a look at that.
Yes.
We have to decide whether that's fair or not from an equitable standpoint. But Morris Turnberry set the rate for they're charging a Morris Turnberry resident the exact same thing as they charge a North Huron resident. There's no difference in the price.
So could I just ask one other question then? Donna, and forgive me, I don't know what I paid for this in the town of Wingham. The flat rate they sent, is that, well, obviously that's much more higher than we're paying here, and that's how you guys come up with those numbers. That's why you subsidized, right?
Sorry, I'm not sure what you're saying.
So if they're paying $1,400 and some dollars, even though we're subsidizing it, what would a ratepayer in Wingham pay?
We're about approximately $488 a year.
$400 a year, or $500 a year?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're gonna have to up it.
For, just for water, you're saying?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yes, you
I'm
just to
sorry,
clarify
water.
that.
You know where I'm going with that, right? Well, this is a conversation for me today, it's just that, yeah, I have a difficult time subsidizing that, again, we'll get into that another day.
But it's a question that we don't own that system,
No,
right? The system is owned by Morris Turnberry, and it's a very small system, which therefore have exponential costs associated with that system that we don't have because we have a larger system that have more people associated to it.
yeah,
So that's the only reason, if there was 60 households attached to more, from Belgrade that are attached to that system, and there was a larger system associated, then there'd be more people to spread the money out,
Yeah.
but there isn't.
Yeah.
So Morris Turnberry is exactly, here's what it costs us to have that system, 1.1 million, whatever the number is, and they're just saying, I've got all these houses attached to it, divide the cost by the number of units, and that's what I need to charge them in order to break even.
yeah.
That's all they're doing.
If I may, just a final follow-up, it's my understanding that a few years ago, we had one or two wells in North Huron, and we decommissioned them or just stopped using them to join into the Morris Turnberry system. And we have those wells sitting there now on our side. We don't really have any knowledge of, but that's my understanding how this all took place. So we actually have wells sitting out in Belgrade in North Huron. They're not being used.
Decommissioned. They're all decommissioned.
And when you say decommissioned, they're gone. They're gone, okay.
Capped, unavailable for use.
Councillor Collins?
Just a caveat to that is Morris Turnberry is charging that cost to the Belgrade's residents, whereas we're not.
So
They are actually hitting, this is what we need, this is what you're gonna pay.
So they're charging North Huron for
We're
the
talking the
cost.
whole town.
Right, but the whole town of Belgrade is paying the identical.
They're
No
not
matter which-
afraid to charge what is needed.
It's a user pay system, same as our system.
But the difference there is, and this was part of the philosophy, is they don't have anybody else to spread the costs out over. For us, because we have 3 water systems and we were all one municipality, part of that was to not look at the wards and what each of these systems cost, but to look at add up all the costs for the 3 systems and divide it out and everybody pay the same, and that's what we've done. They don't have the opportunity to do that because they don't have anybody else. And they only have the one water system with a few people, so they have to charge that. They don't have a chance
But
to.
there's no water stack, it's minimum infrastructure there. There's pipelines. They have a couple of tanks because for the
Well house.
chlorination thing, and that's underground. And it's a simple, easy system, and we're still paying $1,000-something a year. Anyways, the point I was trying to make is they're not afraid to charge what was required.
Right, they're not afraid to charge what is required in
Yeah.
determining.
Yeah.
The philosophy was the North Huron is gonna make every ratepayer the same. Whether that is the right philosophy or not is up for discussion, I think, is the discussion that we're having. So I think that's where we'll leave that discussion at that point, but I think that's where we're headed. Is that philosophy the right philosophy to deal with?
Correct, that's what we want to know.
Okay, Andrew?
So just moving forward with the rate study, again, the linkage to the financial plan and the revenue required. And then, say we propose to examine, really this is a group effort, I think, with staff and council as well, the appropriateness of that declining rate structure for the ICI users, and then we just have to go to the Belgrade rate as well. The next couple of slides, this is really just for information. I don't think it informs much of decisions you have to make. But we just put together for a typical residential user and an assumed daily consumption, what would an annual bill turn into in different municipalities? I'm proudly the winner, right at the top of the list there for water. But like Deputy Reed said, with a smaller system, but a certain base cost, the reality is there aren't many users to spread it out over, so we pay that, and I can tell you that a few years ago, there was a lot of grumblings about that rate going up, and now nobody talks about it.
And I
because it-
think they're the top two for lowest taxes or not.
Oh, yeah. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining. But just to give you an idea of the spread from what we see in the places where we work, and then just plugging in the typical users in North Huron, based on whether or not they're metered and where they live, you can see where you change there. And every system's different, and so there's no real way you can say, well, so-and-so pays X, so I should also pay X. It's not really an apples to apples thing, but it's just, I would anticipate, as counselors, you're gonna get that question, or other people are gonna point out to you, well, so-and-so only pays this, or they pay that, so it's just for information purposes. And they're, for wastewater as well.
Yes.
Through you, Chair. Andrew, like other than the cities, are the other municipalities, we use yours as an example, is it spread out evenly or is it per little system? Like, I'm not sure, I know where you live, I don't know if you're just getting Goderich water, or do you have your own system?
We have our own system.
Okay, and so is your fee the same as what's happening in Dungannon?
Yep, everyone pays the same,
Same. Oh, okay.
Rate, to my knowledge. I'm pretty sure we do.
And sorry, so, and the issue right now is we do currently. So Belgrade residents and Wingham residents, the rates are the same. The difference is that the Belgrade rate is a subsidized rate. That, like, when you establish rates, you're establishing for the entire municipality. There is not that I'm aware of, has there ever been a discussion about, here's the rate for Blythe, here's the rate for North Wingham, here's the rate for East Wallinash. I don't think that is a discussion that I don't think we want to get into, but the intention is that, everybody in that water system is paying exactly the same based on the rate. Now, how much they use is a different discussion. If you use more, you're gonna pay more based on the cubic meter per rate.
If you're metered.
If you're metered. If you're not metered, well, I guess you get the benefit of both. Reed Bailey?
So the Bluffs, I believe it's called up there, that you have going on in ACW, and it's that whole new subdivision by the lake. That's in ACW, is it not? Is it called the Bluffs, or?
Oh, is it here on Even? Not here on Even.
Beside here.
Yeah.
So that whole thing's going, now, are you guys pulling water out of Goderich for that, or do you have?
They're a private.
It's private?
Private system.
Oh,
They
okay.
have private water and private wastewater.
Yeah, so it doesn't affect anything, it just adds more tax dollars to you guys, because there's 400 houses I heard going in there?
Couldn't even tell you that.
Okay.
I know it changes a bit each time when I drive past there, but yeah, their water and wastewater is private.
But it's all private. So
Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
Are there any other questions about I guess Councilor Faulkner?
I'm just curious to, whether it's just a number that you got in here, but the Blythe meter, is there Blythe meters anywhere else?
A handful of them. Five.
Businesses or residential?
Diane, or Diane. Donna,
Yeah.
I
And
don't know where
so
that came from.
that's also part of the discussion, Kevin, that as staff, we've talked about trying to get Blythe metered, and we've applied for grants many times trying to do it. But anyway, as an interim measure in there, as staff, we'd like to bring forward that there's a number of businesses and such in Blythe that should be metered. So we would like to, as staff, as part of all this discussion, a side discussion, is to get your input on actually metering another, 10 or 12 businesses that we feel should be metered. Like, for example, things like car washes and truck washes and all those things, they should be metered. And some, to take that even a step further in preparation for as we move along, we would like to suggest that any new build, whether it's residential or commercial or whatever, be metered from now on, just to get started at this. So anyway, those are some sidebar discussions, but we'll have those as well. But yes, there are a few in Blythe that are metered.
Okay, is there any other questions as it relates to the rate study information that Andrew has presented us today? Counselor Heffer?
Through you, Jeff. We're at 486, so we're down quite a ways, so it warrants a real close look at of raising it for all our new infrastructure that we have to do. I feel that we've been getting a year, I'm talking as a taxpayer myself, we're getting a pretty good deal for years, so we shouldn't complain when we have to pay a bit more. That's just my thought. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, no? Okay, Andrew?
So just a whirlwind summary of the key findings. Again, the way about the commitments is significant in terms of looking at your treatment and your storage needs, especially for water. Projected infrastructure needs, again, for Lingham, that's the water storage facility. In Blythe, it's looking at water storage and the fire flow pump capability there. Potentially a standby well, depending on how you view the storage in that system. Over time, in Blythe, upgrades to the water distribution system, primarily linked to fire protection, and then at the wastewater plant, the dechlorination or eventually UV, whatever way that falls out. Potential for further review would be that whether or not there is a water leak in Blythe and peak wastewater flows will be something like that over time. On the asset management regulation, again, the master plan is going to give you all the information needed for that July 1st, 2021 deadline, and really give you a lot of the base that you need for the 2024 deadline, as well as it relates to water and wastewater assets. On the financial plan, just to beat it to death, again, we need the operating revenue to match expenses. The Lingham Water Storage Project is something that needs to be financed. And then managing the rate of replacement at current or better and building reserves in order to maintain or increase the financial position. And with wastewater, much of the same, just that there's a little bit more catch up to do on improving the rate of replacement. And ultimately what comes from all that is a need to increase revenue. And then on that note, again, the current 3.5% annual rate increase is be sustainable in the long term, and we're looking at a 7 to 9% increase per year. Again, that wouldn't go on forever for the water. The goal would be catch up over 10 years maybe, and then the wastewater would take a bit longer than that. And then that summarizes the typical input to typical impact to your typical customer of both water and wastewater would be in the little over $4 to almost $7 per month range. For ICI users, really, with that declining rate structure, like Westcast would be the big one affected by it if you did move to paying the same rate. I think in the order of like $35,000 a year might be their impact. Facilities that you own, I think it's closer to $5,000, and then for the school boards, they might be a little over $1,000 a year kind of impact in that range.
So, excuse me, so Andrew, we can take a couple minutes and talk to them about that. So this ICI is industrial, commercial, and institutional, and there's really two issues there. So a history hangover that we have is declining rates, and so
You know, all the time that I've been here, it's almost like for water, so we have two issues, you have water and you have sewer. So for water, we've always given them a break, I'm not sure for whatever reason, and I guess the economic development is the reason, that we would give them, the large water users, it's almost like the more you use, you pay at the cheaper rate, over 10,000 cubic meters per year. So that's something as part of staff that we want to bring to you to determine whether or not, so as I said, all those rates were historically in before all conservation and energy management and recycling water and all that stuff came to be. So that's sort of why we have them, but again, we want to bring them up now with the way that with all the climate change and the way the businesses change, that we have this big discussion. And certainly, we've had this discussion before that I know out at the, again, this is out in Morris Turnberry, but at the Westcast plant out there, the rates were so cheap for water, it was cheaper for them to waste the water really, or not worry about recycling the water than to, because the rates were cheaper enough than to implement some sort of a water recycling. So that's something we've talked about. If that plant ever got up and running again, we definitely want to have some input into the water usage there for sure. So again, for the declining rates, to talk about moving those, that there is no break, if you will, for a large water user, but it comes with significant dollars to the business. So you said it would be about $35,000 for Westcast for them not to get a break. Just that was just the one plant too. That was just at 200 Water Street. So then the second half of that though is that we have sewer customers, and the norm now is that you pay your sewer, because we don't need our sewer, but the norm now is that your sewer that you pay is 100% of the water that you pay, with the theory of what goes in goes out. And in a minute, Sean, if you want to jump in on that theory. But we do have, especially institutional users, and some other ones that I have no idea why, again, they're just the way they were past billing, but we want to look at them as part of our rates, that they're paying either 75% of their water consumption for their sewer bill, and Westcast there is paying 50% of their, on their sewer bill, they're paying 50% of their water bill. So we have about 10 or 11 customers, and one of them too, and again, as I said, one of them is the complex, and as I said, like, it's been online since right before amalgamation too, so it was part of that whole, the way that it was billed, less than 100%. So as part of our rate talks, that's something that we want to discuss, but it affects like the hospital and schools and those types of ones. As the institutional component of ICI. And as I said, so for sewer, they're not paying 100% of their water. So Sean, I don't know if you want to add anything on the, I guess there's always been an argument from maybe some types of businesses that they don't, that not 100% of their water gets treated by sewer, but then where does it go if it doesn't? If it doesn't go to the sewer.
Well, that's just it, Matt. Maybe Andrew has some comment on this, I'm not sure, but I would think that if it wasn't one-to-one with some of these larger users, they would have to support that statement in my mind. Okay, fine, if you're saying that you bring a leader in, but you don't put a leader out, then show us how that is, and that would have to be supported through some appropriate engineering, I think. You know, maybe there's technologies that are, you know, maybe they're doing certain things with cooling, or, you know, there's recycling and reuse of water, I don't know. But they would have to, in my mind, they should have to support that. Otherwise, if it's in and out, then, you know, Andrew, did you have any thoughts on that?
Right.
Well, that's kind of what Westcast, I think that was their point, was that, I think that they were not
The water that comes in
Yeah.
may be used and
yes.
reused internally, which is fine. But then alternatively, you see some of the things like what we see going on up the highway, where there's that horrible inequity in water and sanitary, it's what, 654 going in and 200 coming out. It goes to speak to the way some of these places use their water.
For me, the inequality of it is when you, the comment that really caught my eye is the couple slides back where you said 52% of the, is it 52%? Where you talks about the split.
Yeah, 52 paying for 70.
Yeah, 52% of the customers use, just in Winghamton say, customers use 50% of the water, but contribute 78% of the cost, the revenue. Where 37 versus 16, like that, there needs to be a more balance. I'm not, and maybe the conversation is that whether it is 1-to-1, I don't know, but I think there has to be a fruitful discussion about what is equitable for both parts of residential versus what commercial industries and institutions and stuff provide to the municipality as well. You know, it's, at the end of the day, we're paying for it all, because both the institutionalized and the institutions we're paying in taxes too. So it's like it's all in your provincial taxes. The only one we're not is the industry. Like the industries are getting, but they're providing economic development. So, but it's the catch-22. It's always, well, I provide you this, so I should get something back in return. Well, you're making profits. That's the intention of what you're supposed to be making in business, and you should have the costs associated to the system no different than anybody else. But I think there needs to be definitely a hard look at what the inequality is as it relates to the users of the system, and make sure that it's equitable and fair for all of the users in the system, not just the ratepayer or the tax or the residential customer having to suck in a lot of extra costs, because these other users are being technically subsidized by the residential user, is what I'm seeing in those figures. Sorry, Paul, I'll just read Bailey.
So just going back to the industrial, is it my understanding that we don't have a set rate, so the cross-border agreements could have some kind of agreements with those buildings and those manufacturers, and the Foundry has it, and Royal Home all have different ones?
No, like for the water bills for Westcast, like the Westcast plant here, they pay based on our rates, but this slide here deals with water, and the inequity there is because the large users over 10,000 cubic meters per year get a break on their water usage, where you at home pay the full rate for all water that you use. So, but they're being billed at the full rate, and so any of the out of town, like Royal Homes or whatever, they would pay 1.5 times the metered rate.
All the way through. The only reason I ask that is because I recall back when we did this a few years ago, and we got into the nursing home discussion, and they were being billed at the rate of one household, and so we upped that to 25, I believe, and I think there's a few other industries. Are we still doing it that way?
Well, if you're talking about Braemar, so way back in the 1980s or 90s, whenever they hooked up, BM Ross at that time took the number of beds and equated that to a number of residences. So they've always paid based on sewer, because they only have sewer, they don't have water. And so they pay their sewer bill based on an equation that BM Ross did back then, that converted the number of beds to to households, and so they pay based on that. I can't remember right this second how many like units that is, but it's not one.
So if we forward it to Brightspan, and Brightspan is paying on liters going in, it's on a meter and that's it?
Yeah, they're on
Okay.
the meter.
Okay.
Sorry, Councilor Howard.
Through you, Chair. For Andrew, you said that 3716 up there, you said that it's maybe one to look at. What division do you see up? Would it be there with you, other dealings that you do with other municipalities? Just curious.
Yeah, it varies a lot, and I would say it's almost never a perfect one-to-one.
Right.
I don't even know if you've done enough of it to be able to tell you. So off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. And I'll also tell you that if you eliminated that declining rate structure and charged them at the full 100%, it wouldn't all of a sudden swing this back to a 1-to-1 match. There's other things going on there as well in all the math, but it would bring it a little bit more in line with.
Yeah, I just thought that you more or less mentioned that we should look at that, like.
It is a red flag. It's a bit
Yeah.
out of whack, I think. So I don't know if it's if you're more like within 10 or 20%. Is a little more reasonable, perhaps.
Because I know when I was at council.
Councillor Van Henderson?
Yeah, the ICI bills, are they, what was it? The rates, the lower rates, are they going in above the 10,000 cubic meters per year or right away with the first cubic meter? Or is it everything above the 10,000 cubic meters? The ICI
Are the
rates?
ICIs billed below, like, so they know they're gonna, we know they're gonna be billed, or they know we know they're gonna use 12,000 cubic meters. Are they billed the lowest rate from cubic meter 1, or they only billed the lower rate at the 2,000 cubic meters?
I'd have to double check that, but I think it's for all the whole year that they get the lower rate, is what I would say.
So, yeah, okay.
Oh, sorry, Councilor Paul?
Through your chair, Donna, how many customers do we have that hit that 10,000 rate?
I think just one.
Just West Cat?
Just Westcast, but, some of the ICI, like the
Hospital,
hospital
The hospital
and the
would use it.
school,
school
some of
will
those other
probably use
ones.
it.
And I don't think they're actually on the same declining rate, are they? Is there a different one for industrial than for
Same price per cubic meter.
same, okay.
So we have to look at some individual ones and see what we do exactly to that particular bill as we look at this before we can make a recommendation whether we think we should change it to that or not.
But even the conversation of whether, it like even, because Anita's discussion is even brought a discussion to mine, is that even if they use in a 2-month period, even if they use less than the 10,000 units, they should be paying the full rate. In as opposed to you getting a break just because all year you use more than that. Like, you should be paying the rate up to the, if the bonus is gonna be there that you have, or you are a user, in that period, if you've gone over the usage, okay, yes, we'll give you the break. But if you haven't, you should be paying the full rate, not just on every cubic meter, but only over the amount of the, so if it's 10,000, so if you hit 11,000, you get a reduction on the 1,000 extra cubic meters, not the 11,000 cubic meters that you used. I don't know if that's the way it is, but maybe that's part of some of the discussion as well.
But have you ever seen anything like that, Andrew?
Where you have in the additional amount, then you hit the decrease, and yep, we have seen that, and a couple comments on that. Like,
Are
West
you-
Gas is so far above that number
Like
that it doesn't matter. But theoretically, if someone was at 9,500 cubic meters, they would have incentive to waste water for a day, let themselves down, right? Now, you don't have anybody that's close to that threshold right now, they're either way below or way above, so it doesn't matter for you, but hypothetically, that situation exists. And then the other comment is, like Donna mentioned, sort of from an economic development standpoint, this has been done different places in the past. And then the other kind of theory with it is that you already have the infrastructure, you're already making this much water. To make a little bit more really doesn't cost you that much, so if you can recover any additional revenue, then maybe that's a good thing. But it was probably more applicable in the past when energy costs would have been down a bit, and some of the other operational costs were down a bit. And so I think seeing that additional water sale, even at a discount rate, as potential more revenue was probably more applicable in the past than it is now, and that's part of what warrants looking at it now.
Okay, is there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, so what's So motion here.
So I had some slides, but I think we've cut, on the east drive there, I had some slides, but I think we've covered it all basically. They were all about the Belgrave water rates, if you look on your next section in there. So I think probably we don't wanna go into too much more than that, other than to just recap that you have some options there to discuss, whether we continue with the same rate as Blythe, whether we fully increase to the amount that Morris Turnberry is charging, or we phase something in somewhere in between to close the gap. So we have some options in there to be discussing. And then, again, just to recap what you're saying is, we have to talk about the lower percentage for sewer, that not all our customers are paying the 100% of their on sewer bill. They're not paying equal to what their water bill is. So that's a discussion we want to have. And then, again, these declining rates, whether we are going to continue with that or change that. And then I mentioned there to Kevin, one of the other things that we would like to do is to talk about installing some water meters on some spots in Blythe, some of the apartment buildings and the car washes and some of those. And then they pay the same rates as the Wingham metered rates. And the ones who are, the few that are metered in Blythe now pay the same metered water rates as Wingham anyway. So anyway, those are just some of the things that for our next meeting, we'll probably just devote it to just water rates, because we have these number of issues that we have to solve. And so we need to solve those fairly quickly so that Andrew and Ann, you can finish up the financial plan. It gives you a little bit more firmness, I guess, to the numbers you put in. And we want that done by November. So as I said, we're gonna have to move along and have this rate discussion so that we can get some decisions made so that they can finish up their work there, so.
Nick Bailey?
So Donna, are you gonna bring forward to council a list of ones that you feel we should, and same as Belgrave, and let us have that discussion? 'Cause is that how you wanna handle that, rather than have another meeting, because it sounds like we wanna keep moving along here?
I think that we have to have some sort of a meeting about it and discuss them, because like whatever change you make, you can't make it just for one. Like it has to be, it'll be part of the rate package that we're implementing. So whether we can pair it up with another meeting or something like that. I know you're getting pretty well meetinged out these days, but as I said, just 3 this week. But anyway, we'll definitely, we'll talk it over with Dwayne and Carson and try to come up with how we can.
Yeah. Just bring it to a blunt, let's make a decision.
Yeah.
Here's your choice.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a motion here that the council of the township of North Huron hereby receives the presentation regarding the draft water and wastewater master plan by Andrew Darling dated September 27th for information purposes. Reed Bailey moves it, Councilor Heffer seconds it. All those in favor? Carried. And I assume there is a break until Matt comes up, he's coming at 1?
Yes, but he should probably be here about 12:30 and get them set up. So if you've eaten your lunch and is lunch there?
I was gonna say, when we eat lunch, I missed it.
Anyway,
It's not looking too good if it is.
if you're having
Boy, it
your
was
lunch
good.
and ready to get started before 1, we'll keep moving, so. But just on behalf of council, I would like to thank both Andrew and Ann for your presentation today. It was very informative, and it's a lot of information, and we've had a lot of interaction this last couple of years trying to get to this point. But our whole goal is so that going forward, we're in much better position to, and I think we've made big strides, I really do. So as I said, it's painful with the rate increases and such, but I think as Bertie was pointing out, and Trevor, you have to be able to explain them, and then I think once people realize exactly what you're trying to do, they may not like it, but at least they understand that we are trying to plan for the future instead of ignoring everything. So, as I said, back in 2009, it was a pretty rough go to implement those extra fees on the bills at that time. Things were pretty rough around here right back then, but anyway, on a go-forward basis, I think we're headed in the right direction. So thank you both, and we still have a lot of work left to do, but we're getting there, so thank you again.
Thank you too as well on behalf of council. I think the information you gave us at least gives us some feedback as well as gives us some groundwork to know when we're talking with constituents and understands that we can kind of take some of the information we've learned today and apply it to some discussions that we're gonna have with some constituents, because I suspect that we're gonna get a phone call shortly, if not later than sooner, about what's going on with regards to water rates. So, and anybody who's been watching or when this gets posted, that I'm sure there'll be comments started, so thank you very much.
You're welcome, our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll take a break for lunch. Okay, council, we'll reconvene here. So we're going to move on to 5.5, which is regards to asset management, and I will look Donna to introduce our guest.
Okay, thank you. So this afternoon, we're going to be focusing even more heavily on asset management. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a background. So there was changes made to the Public Sector Accounting Board standards that came into effect on January 1st, 2009. So at that time, municipalities were required to report their tangible capital assets in their audited financial statements. So this process resulted in an intensive inventory gathering, and then all your assets, and they still are reported at historical cost on your statements. But we know that historical cost doesn't give us accurate numbers to plan for the future. So in 2011, the province released a little booklet called Building Together, and it was all about long-term infrastructure planning. So the Township of North Huron's first asset management plan was completed in 2013, and it included all our core assets. So again, our core assets are roads, water, sewer, storm, and bridges. So then our plan was updated again in 2016 by Public Sector Digest, and so it's posted on our website. And so today I'm pleased to introduce to you Matt Van Domelen. He's the General Manager of Business Development at Public Sector Digest. And we use the software from their company called Citywide. That's our inventory management and how we manage our assets through that software. So he's going to give you some details about the North Huron Asset Management Plan and talk to you about the OREG 58817 that we've been talking about in the past. So welcome, Matt, and we're looking forward to your presentation today.
Okay, thanks, well, thanks for having me here, guys. It's always exciting to get out of the office and talk asset management. Some people aren't excited about it, but we certainly are. It's our core business, and just to give you a little idea of who we are and where I'm coming from, my background. PSD as a whole has three divisions, and yes, our software side, which Donna touched on, which does all asset management planning, that's our core business. Also budgeting, which obviously that's what we want to do asset management for, right? If we're planning ahead of time, that's really feeding our budgets. It allows us to plan much further ahead, and just in your own personal lives, the better you can plan, the more successful you typically are. So we also have, this is flickering, so it's not me that's doing it, but the research, we have a consulting side too. So I myself am the certified asset manager. I ran an asset management division for 6 years with Terra Foods, if you've ever heard of them. I was in charge of all their assets across Canada. A little different when you're dealing with all across Canada than you're dealing with one municipality, but it's the same idea. I also ran a construction company that did a lot of municipal and MTO contracts. That's all we did, actually. So very familiar with the infrastructure that you have, which then brought me to here today to be able to tie it all together, which is kind of neat. So we do have our consulting side that comes out and does a lot of training. We work with a lot of associations like MFOA, AMO, FCN, sit on the board, or we sit on the committee there that actually brought forward a lot of this regulation stuff too with Infrastructure Canada. We do plans, best practices, program development, and that's really what we want to talk about today is how do we build an asset management program here at North Huron? And how does that support us going forward, right, to make the decisions we want when it comes to budget time? We have our research side too. So the research side's kind of neat because it allows us to do a lot of studies with the municipalities associations to be able to put reports out based on some good data, but it's not coming from a private sector organization, it's coming from the associations that you guys all belong to. So with that kind of, I don't want to just make this seem software driven or anything like that, because the software is kind of a neat thing that helps the staff maintain this going forward. And you're going to see based on the regulations that have to happen, or that have been pushed out by the province, the things that the staff have to maintain and keep bringing forward between each other and to yourselves. They need tools to be able to support them on it because it's just so cumbersome. There's no way you can use Excel or other things. It's very difficult. So with that, this is just a highlight of what I want to touch on today. I want to make it interactive as much as possible. So if you have questions, ask me. There will be, obviously, we've got time afterwards to go through anything else, but if it is something that you want to stop me right in my tracks, feel free. I'd rather make it a little bit more interactive and exciting to be able to talk to. And if it's something I'm going to talk to later, I'll just mention it and say we'll address that after. But what is asset management? I want to make sure everyone has a good understanding of that in general, and I'm sure in all of our different businesses that we do, we have some kind of understanding of what asset management is, but from a municipal standpoint, what is it? Who is involved? Why do I need it? Where do I start? And that's always the biggest things. Where do I start? Because there's so much to it, and I might make this seem a little cumbersome when I go through it, and that's why a lot of people just get bogged down. They just don't know where to start. How do I get this going? And then obviously components of communicating asset management. And that's one of the biggest things that you want to have between staff, making sure they're sharing information back and forth. They have that one central repository so everyone understands what's going on from their own components, but also how they communicate that to yourselves, and how do you guys communicate that to the citizens? Okay, why we're doing certain projects over another. So with that, let's start off with the fluffy sort of definition of asset management. So definition that if you were to look it up, it's a coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from its assets. So we have these assets, the municipality has these assets. We don't have them just to have assets on the books, we have them to deliver a service. And that's one of the biggest messages we always want to give to our citizens. We have roads because it's a transportation service we provide, right? And that's what they expect to be. So they're there for a reason. If they're not being utilized, why do we have them? Okay? And there's a different technique, obviously, that we're going to address to be able to manage those. But one of the biggest things is it's making sure that we're balancing costs, risks, and obviously the opportunities and performance benefits of that. But costs and risks are some of the biggest things that we have to manage when it comes to asset management. I'm not going to read this whole one here, but I have it highlighted. If you were to look up the International Infrastructure Management Manual, it gives you this definition. One of the things I always like, and I have it bolded up there, is a technical and financial component to asset management. So, sometimes all I deal with is municipalities and deal with about 450 of them, 205 in Ontario. Every time I come in to do sort of training with staff, sometimes they like to say, well, whose job is it? Who should really be running this? Should it be engineering, should it be public works, or should it be finance? Who should be the main leader? And if you look at this, it's both. Okay? You need to have obviously one team lead that's going to make sure that they bring it all together for the group, but it's everyone's responsibility to step up and do their part. Because the technical side, that's the engineering public works expertise. We need their technical expertise and also third parties that we utilize to say, here's the things we should be doing to manage that asset better. Then we need the financial component because it doesn't matter what great strategies we think we have, if we don't have the money, guess what? It's not getting done. And that's the reason why we're here today too. And I'm sure that's probably something that comes up in the budget every single year. We only have this much money, what are the projects we're going to pick? So let's make sure that that's tied to a level of service we have, and then we know which ones that make more sense to the community to do over others. So it's definitely a team sport. Asset management in whole is a team sport. It's a sophisticated and coordinated effort amongst all the practices that are happening in the organization. multidiscipline team, so you have to have the experts in their different areas. So water and sewer folks, your roads, your parks, your financial folks, your planning. Everyone has to be on the same page, and council has to have an understanding of it as well. And you guys have to be able to believe in the fact that they're the experts in their areas to be able to bring forward the information they are, right? And you guys have to make the decision on it for the public. If you're doing it really well, you're doing that third bullet point, which is ultimately using public engagement. And that's something you're going to be forced to do here in a sense. Maybe I shouldn't use the word forced, but hand-holding a little bit, I guess, is what the province wants, is to make sure, as part of the regulation, as I go through it here in 2024, is that we have that public engagement sessions, that we are looking to deliver the levels of service that our public, our citizens expect. Okay. Folks I've been working with since 2003, they're the ones that really, it takes time to build all this. So those are the ones that probably, out of all the clients I have, that have really reached out and started embracing the public component of it, because they have good information to be able to start delivering that information to the public. So, as asset management as a discipline, here's what it helps me with. So it does involve though processes, procedures, practices, but really what it helps me do as a manager, it assists and defines the management of that infrastructure. So if I have a good, strong asset management program in place with all the practices and policies, it's going to say, here's the things I should be doing, and it helps me manage my assets better. Okay? If there's anything I want you to take away from today, and if I have your attention on this one, it's bullet point number 2. Okay? Asset management as a whole is achieving that total lowest cost of ownership. So that means we're doing the right thing to the right asset at the right time, okay? Which ultimately makes that public dollar go a little further. Okay? What we're going to do too, though, or we're hoping to do, is establish measures of performance, risk, and cost, and tying that back to an asset-centric base, risk and cost. Okay? So we can start looking at some trending. Where it all starts. So if I was to look at your 2013 plan, your 2016 plan, I know because we did the 2016 plan, and we're on for a lot longer than that too, but I know the information that's in the background that's pulling that out to the plan. It's not always the best information to make sound decisions on that I can just click the button and expect an easy one to say, here's what you should do. We have to refine that. It's going to take time to do that. Up until 2009, we never need to know what assets we had. Right? We had these roads or these facilities that have been here for years, and we never need to know any details on it. So we can't expect it to happen overnight. But we need to keep progression. Okay? It's not perfection, it's progression. We keep moving forward with the information we have. But we need to be able to share back and forth the assumptions we make. So that way you can understand where the decisions come in. But anyways, it all starts with the data that we have, and that's ultimately what different reports, that if you have third parties or internal staff that are doing, that are connected to different studies, connected to your inventories, which might have multiple inventories, you'll want to make sure you're bringing it all together and everyone understands it from one central repository. Okay, so that way everything's open. 2 major reasons for decision error, incomplete and inaccurate data use, and the one I just mentioned before was the misinterpretation and usage of data. If we don't understand where it's coming from, if we don't understand the information that's feeding that report, how can we know if that's the best decision or not? So we have to make sure that we're sharing maybe the imperfections of it as well. But if it's the best information we have at the time, that's what we use. So 2013 did your first asset management plan. 2016 did an update to include all asset categories. You also did a strategic asset management policy this year, correct? So that's actually step 1 of your O-rate that the province is looking for, is to make sure you have this in place. It's something you're probably going to alter a little bit over the next little while as well, and they do ask you to review that. With an asset management plan, just so you understand sort of major components, if you were to go on your website and pull the asset management plan down, and just show of hands, has anyone here read the asset management plan? Okay. So I'll give you some food for thought here. With some communities I work for, when a new council comes on board, it's actually part of the requirement that the onboarding for the councilors is to sign off on that asset management plan, so they've read it, they understand it, and then there's actually, with some of them, they have trending, and they say, here's what we want to make sure that we're only improving this report card going forward by the time my term is done as well. So, obviously, that's folks that have been doing it a lot longer in those communities, and that's okay. It's something maybe you want to consider moving forward too, so that everyone understands what's in those plans, because it's very important, especially if you want it to start feeding the budget process. Okay. But the major aspects of an asset management plan are, you have to have state of the infrastructure. Here's where we are today. Okay? And that's going to include all sorts of different things, whether it's age-based data, whether it's condition data. Here's where we are today in all of our infrastructure assets and other assets. You also want to bring in levels of service to an asset management plan. So you need to understand the levels of service that the citizens expect and tie to the assets. From those, you should have an asset management strategy as well. So here's a strategy that we're going to implement to be able to, here's a strategy we're going to implement to be able to fix the right asset at the right time. And then obviously you need a good financial strategy that backs it up. And those are scenarios too. It doesn't mean you're going to have one financial strategy. We might have a financial strategy that says, hey, we have to increase taxes and we have to have a dedicated infrastructure maybe levy that's going to provide to this group, or whatever it might be, compared to a 1% increase, compared to a 2% increase, using debt. There's so many different scenarios you can use. You're limited on your revenue sources, but there has to be multiple strategies in place to be able to understand what's the best one that we want to tackle, which one can the citizens digest as well, right? And that's why the public engagement piece will be so critical. Who here has been to an asset management workshop in any sort of conference or anything that they've gone to in the last year?
I went to Roma, but Roma's was very vague.
Very good, yeah, okay.
It was, here it is. You
Okay.
need to do this.
Okay, so I'll go through this in a little bit more detail, just so you understand what the province is expecting with mandating for the staff to be able to make sure they're moving forward, and you guys do what you want to. So there's a lot to it. It's simply not going to happen overnight as well, because some of this takes a long time to get going. So the sooner the better, to make sure you're meeting the requirement. So on there I say there's 2019 requirement, there's a 2021 and a 2023 and a 2024 requirement, then after that it's every 5 years at a minimum. So in 2019, we're not spending policy. Nice and easy, first one, check the box, you got it, you're good. So you've met that. 2021 is an actual asset management plan update that needs to happen. So sorry, you are checked with that one, so you're good. But in 2021, you need to have all of the core infrastructure assets done, and there's many requirements, and I'll go through the requirements on my next slide, that have to happen for that one. In 2023, you have to have all of your asset categories done again, with, again, multiple requirements that are in that you haven't done in the previous plans. And then in 2024, you have to do another plan again, and that one actually incurs sustainable levels of service. Okay. So in this first 2021, 2023 component that you have, there's 6 overarching requirements. So you need to have documented current levels of service, which I don't think you probably have.
No.
Okay. Current performance of each asset category too. So what is the performance, what do we expect from a performance level, from our water network, from our road network, that sort of stuff. So this is talks, and just so you know, if at a later point you want us to come back and do this stuff, I actually do a full workshop day on each one of these components down. It gets very, very detailed. But something to consider if once you get to this part, okay? What do we expect the performance to be for each of the asset categories that we want to tackle? For each asset category, a summary of the assets, replacement cost, average age of the assets, available condition information. So staff has already started a lot of that in collecting additional information, which is great. We just now have to get into the assets, which then update them, which update our plan. Description of the municipality's approach to assessing the condition of the assets. So no longer is it okay to just do an age-based assessment. They want to know that you're kind of going out doing the due diligence of inspecting these assets. Doesn't mean it always has to be a third party. Certain assets, yes, you want to have the experts or engineers to be able to go out and detail those engineered studies. But there's many ways to, and I'll touch on this later in a program I call Commission Protocols, of how do we go out and capture the right thing on the right asset to help us identify when we're doing the next activity. And sometimes it's a lot of field checks that we can even do. And staff internally can be trained to be able to do that too. And a lot of the time they are doing that already, and they understand the assets, it's just not documented. Okay? And that's part of the processes that we want to start putting in place too, that then support them. For each asset category, you have to have life cycle events now built into those that make sense to happen as well. And something that your last plan simply didn't have. Your last plan would have been on a build and replace model, right? So it just, for an example, if we have the road out front here, we anticipate it to last, because it's part of our policy that says it's 25 years. It means we put it in the ground, 25 years, we're replacing it. Tell me if that's happened. Probably not in that sort of strategy. If anything, there's many different activities we're doing to it over the 25 years to increase it, right? Because it's the right thing to do, we just don't have it documented, and we don't really know when is the right time to do it either, okay? And not to say we don't know, it's just not, it's really not documented. And it's sometimes part of our planning, it's a little ad hoc, okay? And a lot of time that comes back to the money we have available to even understand constantly, okay? So this is just, it's not that you're not doing it, it's just that it's not brought together in a program.
Chris? Yeah, through you, Chairman. If you're, through the years, improving an asset, a road, and it has a 25-year life expectancy, it's okay to extend that?
Absolutely, yeah.
As long as it's documented?
So you know what, I'll get into that a little bit more in my next, because I'll show some diagrams that actually show that a little better. From a financial aspect, that's totally different. But we want to make a distinction between the financial requirements and reporting that Donna has to do compared to what the requirements are from an asset management perspective. So it's going to extend the asset's life, and we want to do that, because that's the right thing to do with the right asset to improve it at a lower cost. We're still going to report on it over the 25 years, maybe depending on the major activity or rehabilitation that has to happen.
But you don't have someone in Toronto gonna, no, it's gotta be.
No, it's your program, it's your plan. It's, as long as you're following GAP from a financial perspective, you're good, and the municipal, and then from the asset management side, that's your program. And that's part of your policy, which is signed off by council, which is then provided to the province. For municipalities, which is like yourself, on 5, population less than 25,000, a description of assumptions regarding future changes in population or economic activity. So all they want to make sure is that you are looking to the future too. So I work with a lot of communities in northern Toronto, high growth communities. So for them, very different to know, hey, I have to really make sure I'm aligning my planning properly, because otherwise the infrastructure we're putting in the ground today is not going to support us in 10 years from now. So that's all they want to make sure that you're doing too. So if you do have a new development going out somewhere, or whatever it might be, you're thinking of all the other things that could potentially happen at the same time. Okay. The 2024 plan. So here's the one that makes everyone nervous. And this is why I would say start, I'm going to jump back one. These ones here, 2021 and 2023, they are the exact same. The only difference is that the 2021 is only the core infrastructure assets, just like you had to do in 2013. So your roads, your water, your sewer, your bridges. Okay? They don't have storm in there. I don't know why the province didn't say storm, because to me, that's coordinated effort when you're doing those projects and include your storm assets. So I would do those no matter what. The 2023 is the rest of your assets. So all your general government, your facilities, your fleet, your machinery equipment, okay? Your parks, assets, that kind of stuff. But to me, a plan doesn't mean a lot to me if it doesn't incorporate everything. And maybe you would know better, and Don, certainly you would, when it comes to budget time. You have an allotment of money that you typically spend on your capital projects and your operating projects. It's different year to year. And I missed the presentation this morning, and that probably actually would be good for me to hear. But for food for thought here, if you're, say next year, you decide you're going to do a major water project, and here's how much money it's gonna cost us, and it's way more than we've ever had to take on. That's gonna put a big burden on our capital budget. That means probably other asset categories are gonna be affected, because we can't do those roads projects now, or we can't do every pool, or whatever it might be that someone's expecting us to do, we have to put those on. So year to year, your categories, and when I say categories, that's your different asset groups, might change. So if you're telling me that you know every year this is how much money I put into roads and it's always staying the same, then your plan would make sense, because if I only did infrastructure categories, that allotment of money is all I'm gonna bring into that plan. But if you jump all over the place between different categories and money gets traded between different areas year to year for the budget to be able to do that project over others, then it's not gonna make any sense to you. I don't know if I lost you there, and if I did, I apologize, but it's just to get your head wrapped around the amount of money you have available. You wanna look at that annual revenue source that you have towards your asset replacement. And if you have that, you wanna make sure that you're looking at all the assets with all the revenue sources to be able to know, here's our realistic picture. So, not to put more work on the staff on this one, and I apologize for throwing it out this way, but I would bring in all your asset categories for the 2021. It doesn't mean you have to bring in all the additional requirements that are expected in the 2023 plan for those other assets, but I would still bring them into the plan. Even if and then just make sure that everyone understands the assumptions that you made on those other ones, because they're not gonna have certain life cycle activity and that kind of stuff, okay? So, definitely, my recommendation, do both, even if it's at the general capital assets at a lower level in a sense. 2024 is every asset category. And in every asset category, the biggest change in this plan compared to 2021 and 2023 is the fact that you need to have that bullet point, the proposed levels of service, okay, number one. So, we're gonna document in 2021, 2023, our current levels of service, so that's what we've been currently doing over the last few years. It's kind of funny because, it's not really funny, but here's what we've been doing, here's what the citizens expect, here's our infrastructure gap we have. So we have a level of service up here, but we can only fund at this level. So eventually, we're gonna get to the point where we can sustain this, right? And it's our job, or your jobs, to make sure that citizens understand that, and that's the reason why, if we have to pass taxes, and that's what it is, or we have to look at changing our levels of service, so that our levels of service meet our revenue stream. That we put towards infrastructure. All right. So, and again, if I lost you there, I apologize. But anyway, so the biggest thing is making sure we have those current levels of service, and that's going to include a lot of public engagement sessions. So the sooner you can get your first plan done, that's where you start working together as a team with the staff to make sure you guys are all on the same page of what all this information means, where you can better the information, so you're going to come back with those updates every so often. But then you can probably start having some working groups with some citizen engagement to start sharing this information back and forth. And start getting the word out, say, hey, what's the expectation? What do our citizens want next? Okay. It's always different. Community is different. Rural communities to urban communities. It's amazing. With the city of Hamilton, I've been working with them for a long time. Obviously, completely different scale than what you guys are in that sense. But man, we've been doing asset management with them since 2003, and just even in the last 5 years, the change of the proposed levels of service that they want because of the bike lanes. Now, they don't care about baseball diamonds all the time as much, they want cricket fields, and they want all these other different infrastructure asset groups we never had before. So we're like, okay, how do we change all this, right, from what our current setup is? So it does take a lot of time to work this through, and certainly the engagement piece is big. So you have to pull that out, and you're probably going to always have the same 5 to 10 people that show up for those engagement pieces anyway. So the longer you have to reach the citizens, the better.
Matt, just a question about when it talks about in 2024 the proposed level of service. That like the way it reads on that slide would be it's a thought of where we are at. what, if we have something in there, is there somebody at the ministry that's of infrastructure, whatever, looking at this plan and saying, well, that doesn't align with something, and you don't meet the requirement?
They're gonna look to see if it aligns with your financial strategy, for sure. Because they wanna make sure that those proposed levels of service are sustainable. Okay. Yeah.
So all I'm gonna say is, so when the ministry determines that, I want the ministry here to come to our public engagement meeting, to sit right beside the Reed and the rest of council and listen to our ratepayers. Because that's, again, asset management is great, and we're talking about asset management all the time with our ratepayers today. And we already know, we collectively, I think, already know it's not sustainable to where we are today. The ratepayers in today's market won't have it. They don't care if it's not sustainable. They want it now. But what I'm saying is that if there's somebody else in the regulations determining this in Toronto or whatever, that it's not matching to our financial strategy, how do we know whether we're onside or offside as the legislation? Is somebody gonna be physically telling us?
So they haven't, you get the political answer sometimes with this one. So they are doing audits. They were doing audits actually on your asset management policies as well. So I don't know if you saw that email out or not, but they are randomly picking municipalities to make sure that they check the boxes. They have not been able to confirm for us what the slap on the wrist is. But I will tell you one, if you want to go for any sort of additional infrastructure grants that are out there, you better make sure the plan backs it up, because you will not get approved for those. So they're kind of holding you at that, right? Well, if you do want to do this project, and you want this grant to be able to support you, then you better be able to display it. Okay?
I wouldn't suggest otherwise. I would
Yeah.
expect this to happen.
So my biggest thing is there's one thing to have the strategy in place, and here's what we expect to do. It's hard to be able to do it. So they're gonna come and make sure that you put that levy in to meet it? Maybe not. Are you making sure you're putting those reserves away? I mean, they're gonna look at that for sure to say, what have you adopted? How are you changing? Because they do wanna make sure that they just wanna make sure that we're reviewing everything now. We are thinking about all the different options. And I mean, asset management, when you look at 2013's asset management plans, it was a capital procedure. It was really basically a capital long-term plan, right? A little bit more detailed than our typical 10-year or 5-year plans that we would do. But that's not full asset management. Asset management is combining our operating budgets with our capital budgets to make sure that we're doing the right thing to the right asset based on our risk, right? And just because the worst road out there, it is the worst, doesn't mean that's the right asset to do, okay? Next year is gonna be the same amount of money to replace that road, no matter what. So why am I gonna go out and do that one? But there's a risk that the municipality takes to have it in that shape. So we need to look at risk mitigation.
So just a quick one then, so you're suggesting what might happen with this is we're gonna send this into them, we have no choice, and we're gonna say we have 3 arenas and 4,800 people. They're gonna come back and say you don't need 3 arenas for 4,800 people. Fine, stops there. Until we go for a grant to fix a road up, and then they're going to say to us, we told you you can't afford 3 arenas, and you didn't get rid of one, therefore you can't have the grant. Kinda headed that way, from what I'm under?
I wouldn't say it that way. I mean, that's your decision, and that's your role to communicate that the citizens and say, this is how much it costs to maintain these 3 arenas. I go through this with Chatham Kent all the time, because I have 18 different wards, and every single one wants to keep their arena, and they've been in there since forever. So it costs a fortune to do. And so they've been trying to educate them on how do we make one for 3 different communities, to try to centralize it and have 2 pads there that everyone's coming to, and it's more efficient, it's easier to do, and it's honestly, from an asset management perspective, it's the right thing to do. But that's hard, because you're different wards, and some of the citizens have always had it, have always wanted it there, and they want that history, right? So that's difficult. I'm not saying the province is gonna say, no, you need to get rid of these. But your financial strategy to be able to manage that should back it up of why you're keeping it, right? And it doesn't mean you're not gonna get the grant for the bridge, or for the road that maybe, or the water line that's gonna feed it. You just have to make sure that your financial strategy is strong enough to be able to support all of them, as well as then the project you're going for is detailed as part of your asset management strategy and the benefits of why you're doing that project over another. They really don't, I wouldn't say that, you know, the province doesn't sit down and go and read every single one of them and go through it in detail. And to be honest with you, in a lot of them too, if you pull up some of the plans, and there's a difference between the 2016 and 2013 plans. If you do go online and check any other municipalities, there's a big difference between those ones and recent ones. We just finished Lambton Shores Overig AMP, so it's out there. I presented to council in November, so you won't see it yet, I guess, but they'll put it on the website after. So they're already ahead of the game. They've done everything to meet 2021's regulation. We did the plan, but we worked great with the staff to be able to make sure they understood it. Even in that plan, it doesn't get down to every single asset in your plan, right? We don't display, here's every single road section, here's every single bridge. We will detail, here's the number of bridges you have, here's the average condition you have in some of those bridges, here's the total replacement cost you have, and here's maybe the ones that we should be considering next as our main priority. So you don't have to have all the details in there, and so the province, honest, wouldn't even know if you had 10 arenas. They would go to your PSAP list, potentially, if they wanted to say, show me your asset inventory, but they're not looking at it to that finite detail. They expect it. That's what the staff here are doing. Okay. When you go for an infrastructure project, that's when you're gonna detail the assets as best you can. And that's actually the benefit that the staff have by doing the plan inside the tools they have. Because later on, they can always go back when those infrastructure grants come out, go back into the tool, actually pull out and detail all the risk, replacement costs of that project, and how the benefit factors are from the level of service that tie in, and then be able to submit that information with, okay, and then be able to show that to the plan. Good questions though, I like it. I don't think I talked about this today. So yeah, municipalities must review and update their asset management plan at least every 5 years after this too. So even though in 2024, you're not done. Right? It's gonna keep going, that you have to publish this. As a best practice, you should be doing an update every year, if not twice a year. And it doesn't have to be a full plan, it's just an update. Here's the things we're working on to improve the information in our data. Okay, so you can understand the changes that we're doing. If we updated, so if we got better information and we want to update a model a little different from maybe just our bridges or our roads, then they should be sharing that with you too. So you have a good understanding.
So if you did that review, so for example, if you're saying a review of twice a year or every year, if you do parts of the asset management review or management plan throughout the 5 years, on the 5th year, do you have to, like for example, in year 1 you did bridges, let's just say, and then year 2 you did buildings, or in year 3 you did, on year 5, you then have to still go back to the one you did a year ago and adjusted that again?
Yeah, so my thing is you probably wouldn't do a full update every time. Here's the thing, asset management is going to be living and breathing every single day. Okay? That's what it's going to get to. And that goes right down to water main breaks, fixing potholes on roads. We want to capture that information as we're doing it now, right? And just go right back to the asset. And if it is becoming living and breathing, you're updating it on a daily basis. It's not, when I say to an update to a plan, it's more of an information session to say, here's all the things that we've done just recently, to share that. It doesn't mean you have to do an actual plan update. Okay?
Oh, you just have to, okay,
I'm just saying, yeah, you'd want to bring information back and forth between the asset management committee to council a couple times a year. Okay. But yeah, you don't, and I wouldn't do your plan bridges this year, roads next year.
No.
It wouldn't make any sense. So yeah, so within the 5 years that you'd have to publish a new one on your website. Make sure it's signed off by council, signed off by your lead, that's for the staff, and which says that the executive lead must sign off on it, and be approved resolution passed by council as well, and then that goes back on your website. So with that, the kind of neat thing about that is that the staff a long time ago purchased the software at a much discounted cost that it is today. So you're in a good form, is that as long as you are updating this information, and you do have third parties or internal staff that are updating the assets as they go, it's automatically updating the information, which then you kick up those new reports to update your plan. Okay? And it's just the analysis and the talk that you guys have to have to decide what the strategy is gonna be going forward with implementing it. Okay? And the reason why I like to say it twice a year too, is that you should be doing it before budget. Because then you're talking about these things before you even get to the budget, and everyone's aware and they kind of know what's going on with the assets and then where we are and what the expectations are gonna be. So that when you get into the budget time, you're not really dealing with that anymore. Oh, yeah, review of the assets and the progress of July 1st, we kind of talked about that already. Post its current strategic asset management policy, so you have posted this, so you're good. This is actually something that you want to make sure you're reviewing every so often, is the policy, to make sure the policy doesn't need an update as well. Because depending on your expectations of how things are flowing, just update that. So amendments and policy. Some good news, I guess, let's take this out of, to add this to the equation, I guess. The top one, there's set aside $60 million of the new MAP program. So a few years ago you had MAP, I don't know if you submitted for it or not, or you didn't, okay. Definitely you want to do this time. And can I share that?
Can we get $60 million?
I'm not gonna say yes to that. Is this being taped?
Yes.
So with that program, it still hasn't been finalized of how it's gonna be rolled out, or different iterations of it. So I can't share that, but hopefully you guys are gonna have direct funding. If not, then there's an opportunity to submit for the grant. And what that grant is really designed to do is to help you with building your asset management program. Okay, so folks like myself, or if you want to do assessments in the field, or other studies that support this and help you move the data forward and all of that, that's what that's designed to do. Okay, so it's just to get you there quicker, because and at least and this is a federal grant, but at least they understand municipalities are struggling with building these programs. And if they expect the reporting to happen, they need some support to be able to do that. Okay? This is the second iteration of it, because it was there a few years ago, and then all of a sudden the money was dried up, and it ended faster than everyone expected, because they expected it to be there for 5 years, and it was only there for 2.5, so some folks didn't get it.
Really?
I just want to ask a question. So, I quite often get these on my emails coming in through about grants and that. I'm going to presume our senior staff get those all the time too, like on a regular basis? Or do we have to go looking for them, Don?
No, we get notifications all the time about all the grants and things.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, so we have you have a folder with them in and stuff like that. Okay,
Yeah.
I just always meant to ask that and never thought, do we get these coming to us, or do we just decide we're gonna do something and have to spend 3 months looking for grants? But we would know where the grant is, and, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
We certainly do, and then we always make sure we reach out to our research division always, because we have a grant division. Always reaches out to the clients too, they give them webinars on the briefing of the grant, which you have to do, how you detail it, what's expected, and then whether it supports you with it as well, depending. So, you have that option. Oh, the second one, so some other funding that supports you with that too is the, what is it, the OSIF. You can use your OSIF funding as well, so your formula-based funding can help you with any of this additional training or support as well. Your gas tax funding, I know you probably have that right off the bat to some infrastructure assets and that sort of stuff. This year you had another one-time double amounts. Maybe that already got spent, but that's there to support you as well if that's the case. And one I didn't put on here is the modernization funding. You can use that as well. It's not dedicated to asset management, but it certainly does support you on aligning different programs depending on different departments, how they're using it. So something to review to be able to support you on. So, that gets that out of the way. I told you it'd be longer than I expected. The asset management program. So if you're building an asset management program, so just So you guys understand what the staff are gonna take on here. And they are doing it already in some capacity. Now it's really documenting the procedures and practices, okay? But here's the main items that you wanna have when you're building an asset management program. One of the first things that I always do when I'm building one is have that state of maturity. Where am I at today? And when I say state of maturity, I don't just mean in my data. Okay, where are my gaps in my data? I also wanna know what's my capacity level from a staffing standpoint? Who can take on what? If we expect our staff to go out and capture more information and update that, do we even have the capacity to do it? Because if we don't, what's the point of saying we're gonna go do it if we don't have capacity? We're never gonna get there. So you have to know. We have to know where our data is between different departments. What are they using? It's amazing when I go into this, I almost sometimes feel like a shrink that's sitting there and I'm asking the same person 5 different questions. By the 5th time, I get the true answer. And the reason why I didn't want to say it is because maybe that the other department was in the room and they just didn't want to say it in front of them. And they hold their data sometimes at ransom. And they don't want to share it. So we have to align the different groups in the different areas. Some organizations are much better than others, and actually here, I don't think you've ever had a problem, so that's fantastic. But it's amazing how many engineers don't want to talk to the finance folks. But we need to know where we're at today. What's our knowledge? So if we don't have the knowledge to build a risk model or build strong life cycle models, how are we going to get there? Okay, so it does look at everything. So you want one of your staff members, if that's the case, to sit down and detail all that information of where we're at today, so we can put a good asset management strategy in place to be able to become best practice. Okay. Your policy, done, check. You're good on that one already. Condition assessment protocols. So this is what I call it. Condition assessment protocols and data capture tools. What I really mean by that is you need to have a condition program in place. So I know you go out and do your bridges every 2 years as part of your OSIN inspection, and that's because it's regulated to do so. Great, we're getting those all done. For our roads, how often are we going out and getting our roads inspected? Is it every 5 years? And when we do that every 5 years, if we are we doing every single road? Because that's not the best use of money. What I would suggest is you look at your different class of roads, and the importance, and this is where your risk modeling will help you, because the higher risk assets are the ones that we want better information on more consistently. Okay, so maybe every 2 or 3 years I want it on this road. Maybe every 7, 8 years I want it on another road. So we're using the same amount of money that we have, but in a better way. But you have to detail that down to your roads as well. So you build a good, strong program in place to say, here's what we're capturing, when we're capturing it, and bringing that data back in to update our plan. And that's sort of already what's happening. I'm sorry, I haven't shown that in a couple more slides, I'm jumping ahead. But very important. And it's also, you know what, I'm getting way to my toes, wait till I get to the slide. Risk and criticality models. This is definitely something, and it's required to do so as well. Making sure you're having those risk models in there, and that's going to help us dictate which assets we're going to do over others and what activity. Life cycle models. Definitely want to have those built in, and you're going to refine them as you go too. Because just because this is what we set up first, doesn't mean that's the best approach. And that's where you want to do scenarios, and that's going to help you with your levels of service. If we do different strategies over others, let's take those out, because this is a better way of doing it, or a more cost-effective way of doing it, as long as it meets our level of service. And then, of course, you have your updated asset management plan that pulls from all of that detail. So I mentioned lack of resources. Certainly time, money, sometimes knowledge is the biggest thing that we find are issues inside building an asset management program for municipalities. It is resource heavy, very time consuming. And sometimes it's complex tasks, and it's ongoing. So from a resource standpoint, one of the heaviest lifting components is getting it built. But you do have to understand it's ongoing too, and because you are doing this every 5 years and constantly updating, it's a change of practice in the field to be able to update that information on this ongoing basis.
Sorry, Matt, question about resources. In the municipalities that you have been operating in, is there an individual who has a significant amount of time dedicated to this particular practice?
It's a good question, and I get this all the time. Because some people say, well, we need an asset manager, right? We need somebody that's going to take this all and they're going to be our savior and just fix it all. That's why I kind of started off the talk with saying it's not just one person's job, it's everyone's. And to be honest, you're all doing it now. It's just bringing it together and documenting it better and right down to the asset level. So It doesn't mean that engineering and public works are gonna change the activities they're doing, it's just changing maybe some of the practices, the processes of how they do it. Okay? It's nice, I would say there's always someone who's dedicated in the sense of being the team lead to bring everyone together. Some folks, some communities have hired a dedicated asset manager, and that's up to you, I guess, if that's the flavor. Normally, it's not someone who's just dedicated to asset management, though. They're usually utilizing many different functions. Sometimes it is under, it's an individual that's under finance that might, hey, they do it off to the side of their desk. And that's really what it is. It's more of the program or the project manager more than anything. Because it still goes to the different asset areas to manage their assets, right? And making sure they're updating their information based on the practices and processes that we've designed and built. I'm talking to council.
Thank you.
But it all comes down to this too. Because it is complex, if it's not tackled correctly, it becomes poor data. And there is those gaps that end up happening, which then creates misalignment. People don't believe in the plan, they don't stand by it, they stop sharing information, and out of that, you just get disruption and nothing ends up being achieved through the process. Okay. So that's why I always say, it doesn't have to be perfect, but make sure you're sharing and any assumptions that different departments are making, they're sharing them so they understand. But they're also sharing them, I had to make these assumptions, and here's the next things I'm gonna do to improve it. Okay, so that I can bring back better information the next time we do it, which might be 6 months, might be 8. I should have said this as part of the maturity. When we do these, when I sit down with the groups, we put a plan in place that doesn't make it cumbersome for them. So some groups, maybe your roads group is gonna be best practice in a year. Maybe the parks is gonna be 2 years. Maybe water, wastewater might be a year and a half. You have to look at their capacity to understand how long are we gonna get there, because here's the things that we need to do just for that particular group. Right? So each group will have their different phase in approach. Under just some things that we've learned by doing this, we're asset managers in over 46 communities. So we jump in for 2 years and we become the asset manager. We train all the staff to do that. So out of that, some of the things we have found is that there is the lack of internal asset management teams. So it's something that, don't know if you have that yet, but I know you probably have your team that's sitting here.
That's it.
But you should almost formalize it and be able to talk to it and have even field staff involved in it too, right? So they understand reason why we're asking them to go out and find certain stuff and update that information, how we're utilizing it. So that way they understand when they're assessing it, how it's being utilized, and you know, they're feeling a part of it as well, because they are, right? All the information is coming from them too, so. Food for thought. Fine tune some basic metrics. This needs to happen, and this is 97%, maybe 99, 100% communities need this. We only have the information that we currently had. It was never there meant to be for asset management. It was for a different activity that we were looking at. So we certainly need to fine tune some metrics and bring in additional information. So there's lots of information out there that's available. We just have to know how to capture it, what we should be capturing, what time we should be capturing that. I put 3 bullet points in here that great things that your staff has already started to do. Now they just need to be able to merge it all in together. But they've already been thinking of these things since the 2016 plan. Because at least the 2016 plan raised some eyebrows and say, okay, we understand we did it on this, and we did it on this and this, so if we fine tuned that, here's what else we can do, and they started doing that. So completed the camera work, right, on some of your underground infrastructure. So now taking that information, applying it to the assets, which is gonna spit out a whole new state of your infrastructure based on the new information found. Okay. Water and facilities breakout. Water and sewer facilities breakout. So just for example, sometimes we have our facility as a whole, right? And from a financial perspective, we did it as one asset. Well, we're not going to manage the asset going forward that way. We have mechanical, electrical, we have pumps, and all sorts of different gadgets and everything else that we can change at different times to improve the overall asset and make sure it's functioning at the service that we want to. Right? So we have to break out and have that finite detail to be able to manage it better. Apply operational data onto assets as well. So this is where I made the comment here, if you're doing a crack ceiling program, right? If we do that work, well, then that improve the asset or not? Did we fix these potholes? Did we replace those lights? Whatever it might be, that operational data, that's important information, and it updates the assets we have to tell when we should be doing the next event based on what we've just done. So we need that good information that the field staff are doing to be able to put on the assets, right? To give it a realistic picture of what's happening and not just that build and replace model. We need to develop some key processes. So that's definitely something you're going to be, you should be looking at and the staff should be chatting about. You have the processes in place now. How do we refine them a little bit? And is there a need to build the internal capacity as well to support this?
Matt, one question I have is, in the regulations, is there parts of the regulation that dictate what operational metrics need to be used in order to produce the plan? And is there, inspection record or stuff that the staff are required to do from an inspection perspective to be able to say that we've applied to that regulation?
There is some metrics that they have defined, but at a minimum. Some of them are kind of fluffy, to be honest. So we've actually gone back to them to say, well, don't make this harder on the staff to just capture stuff that's not useful for them. So we've actually gone back to Infrastructure Canada on that. We sit on that committee to say, and Infrastructure Ontario, to look at these to refine them a little bit more, so that if you're going to force metrics down, to make sure that they're useful and that that they're going to come back and forth between council and stuff too. So there are some, so I can share that with yourself. I don't have it in here with the actual metrics, but they are listed. Data performance and analysis. So where do we start? And this is the thing, you've already started with some of this, looking at your data and talking with the staff just in the last couple of weeks. How do we break up the data to be more realistic? And I'll give you an example. Back in 2009, you had to start capturing your inventory. And all that was, if maybe the province and the said, or the Fed said at the time that this inventory, we're going to think about asset management down the road. So when you capture this, maybe capture it in this way instead of this way. So if you want to take an example, a road, they collected a road and it might have gone from X to Y. Well, maybe that went through 3 different intersections. Well, if we're going to replace it, we might not replace it all the way to X to Y. We actually want it broken down section by section, because that's how we would maintain it going forward. So sometimes we need to disaggregate some of that data, align it more realistic to what we're going to do in the field. So that has already sort of begun, or been identified anyways. We also want to align projects together. We want to align the underground infrastructure with the above infrastructure, so that depending on the activity we're doing, do mill and pave make sense to do on that road now? Because in 20 years, we're going to do the underground infrastructure. Or we don't do anything to it, because in 5 years or 3 years, we're going to do the underground infrastructure, and we're going to do some risk mitigation in the meantime to be able to get to that point. What's the point of spending money on that asset if we know we're just going to dig it up? Okay. So lots of data analysis and disaggregation, migration that really needs to happen. I'll give you an example here. Typical asset management roadmap, street inventory. So you might have an asset name, you have your asset ID, you have a description of it, you have it in service, when it went into service, how many lane kilometers you might have, or length in meters, or area square meters, depending. You might have, here's the replacement cost that we have on it, and here's how we developed that replacement cost. And maybe that replacement cost in this instance here actually shows CPI tables. So that means that we're using an indice from StatsCan to improve, or to increase that value that was a historical cost back in 1974 up until 2019. It's one way of getting the numbers we need. We know we did a study with AMO to show this, the difference between the two, and with some asset groups it's worked okay, other ones it's understated, sometimes it's overstated. It's a good starting point though, so at least it gets the talk going. After that, we need better information. Instead of using a CPI, maybe we use an area per square meters based on the last tenders that we've had in the last 2-3 years, and we apply that to all of our assets of that similar nature. Okay? It's more realistic cost. So it's fine-tuning some of that information, but it's also, what are we missing? So class of road, the things that we want to know to say which ones we should be doing others and how we're going to manage them. We might not have that detail on our roads yet. So it's part of our maturity that we want to go and sit down, is what are the things that we would like to have to really make it easier for us to distinguish the activities that we should be doing, and getting that attribute data back onto our assets. And again, this is a staff component of it. I just want you to understand it, to say the more information they have on some of these assets really does help. And sometimes they actually need the help to be able to go and capture that data on it. Okay. Condition assessment. This is actually, just to give you an idea, we talked about proposed levels of service and that sort of stuff. This is just a screenshot that I took out of our system. It kind of gives you an idea of how you're trending, in a sense, based on risk. Or actually, sorry, this is condition. So greens are good, blues are not, are okay, yellows are fair, the reds are poor condition. Okay? But it lets us know how we're trending over the years. And each scenario, as we update our information, we'll start projecting that condition for us. I thought there were a lot more actually, so I don't know if it's skipped over. But anyway, sorry, I actually had some of your data in there as well. I think it's on my computer on my stick. So, but anyways, some of the data disaggregation as well, when we get back to, this is an example now taking that first screenshot that I had of the assets. Now I've added more information in. So I added surface material. So maybe I didn't have that originally. I didn't have the service class. So I'm finding that information because that's going to help me with any of my modeling as well. Okay. Keep defining, keep refining your information. And that's where I got to what is it worth to improve your replacement cost methods. Type of capture. So when we're talking about going out and capturing this information, I mentioned before that if you're doing a roads needs study every 5 years, and it's on every single asset, it's maybe not the best approach. So the type of captures you can do are field check or road patrols, right? Which you're doing probably some of that already, right? Part of the minimum maintenance standards. So how do we get that information over onto our assets on when we need to identify something? Then sometimes you actually need to do a full condition assessment on certain assets. Now, there's a difference between an assessment and a study. So if you do a roads needs study, you're getting the study with it. Your asset management plan should actually do the study for you. Okay, the details on it. And actually, your systems that you have, as long as you have your life cycle modeling built in, it'll automatically perform the study for you. So that'll save you money in itself. Instead of paying a consultant to go do the study for you, just have them do the assessments, log that information back into the system, it'll pick the study up for you. Okay. But you have to have that modeling set up well in order to take it out properly. Then you got detailed engineered studies. There's certain assets that we absolutely want to make sure that we have a third-party engineer company coming in and updating those studies for us. Cycle of capture. We want to make sure how often are we doing this cycle of capture. Index and reporting formats too. So how are we doing it and that sort of thing. This is right out of your system now. This is an asset that you have, the water tower. That I think, I just wanted to give you an example of what this looked like. If you looked at your old 2016 plan, you look at the risk rating, it's hard to see on that screen, I think, but it says it's actually a 20. It's in poor condition, or it's a high risk in the red. If you look at the age-based condition, it says it's fair, but actually in that report, it says it's actually worse. Okay, because and if we look at the plan, we would say, well, it's actually doing okay, it's in fair condition. But that's based on age condition. If we actually did the assessed condition on there, it's gonna make it worse. It could have gone the other way.